I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. With a hanging rope in front of my eyes, that I am not afraid of, I write to tell the tale that I lived, leaving nothing unspoken. I want to tell you everything that I said in court which they did not understand. And everything that I cried out under torture which was not heard. Everything that I screamed out whilst I was brutally kicked by 4 forceful interrogators, who regarded themselves as almighty. Perhaps someone in this world would hear my cries and feel my pain. I want people to know and judge as they wish. I want them to hear me, and then if they still wish, tighten the rope around my neck even tighter. I want them to know what happened to me at the age of 19 that has made me no longer fear death. I want to tell them so that they know how my voice was silenced in my throat. How the unfortunate events which lead to me being known as a killer were wrapped up with conspiracy and deceit, to obtain a judgment that I consider unjust. I, Reyhaneh, am a 26-year-old girl, currently living in a grave-like prison in Shah, waiting for my life to end. Once upon a time, on a spring day in 2007, I was living free from pain and suffering, in a home built with love and compassion that continues to fill the house to this day. I, Reyhaneh, the eldest daughter of the family, was a 19-year-old university student in my 3rd semester, studying computer software. I was also working part-time as a designer for a firm for about 1 year. I got the job through a family friend who had recommended me. My monthly salary was 150 million rials. I worked at the firm every day from morning to evening, except the days that I had to go to university or had exams. My father and mother continued to provide for me and still gave me pocket money. I never had any financial difficulties. On a spring day, I was sat in an ice cream shop. I was talking to a client over the phone about a booth that I had designed for them at an international exhibition. After my phone call ended, a middle-aged man who had been sitting with his friend approached me. He looked like any ordinary man that you see on the street, sit next to in a taxi, stand beside in a queue, or meet in parks and restaurants. You could imagine seeking refuge with someone like him if a guy harassed or disrespected you in public. He began, "I overheard your telephone conversation unintentionally and realized that you are an interior designer." I said, "Yes." He said, "I have a place that I wish to convert into a doctor's surgery." "I am a plastic surgeon," he added. I burst inside with excitement. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, was 19 years old at the time with a head full of excitement and a heart yearning for success. I grew up in a talented and creative family. Although I was a computer software student, I was not alien to the tasks of a designer. I was able to design using computer software programs that were available at the time. I gave him my business card which had the details of the firm as well as my name and telephone number. I, Reyhaneh, was acquainted with Dr. Sarbandai and his friend, Mr. Shiki, that day. I left the ice cream shop and waited for a cab by the side of the road. A car stopped in front of me to offer me a ride. It was Dr. Sarbandai and his friend. I thanked them, but they insisted and said we could talk about our business on the way. I obliged. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, a 19-year-old girl, had no idea that meeting these 2 men would change my fate and bring me closer to death. We agreed to arrange another meeting later to discuss our business. A few minutes later, I got off at Noboniad Street. As usual, when I arrived home, I began telling my mother about everything that happened in the day. I was happy that I had managed to find real work on my own. I told my mother, when the practice surgery is ready, they will need to advertise and print posters and leaflets. I had always dreamed about opening my own printing shop. I wanted to employ as many girls as possible to work in my shop. In order to gain experience and learn the craft, I had asked my boss to put me in charge of liaisons with the printing company that processed our orders. I never felt tired. I wasn't afraid of working. I was full of eagerness to learn. I didn't believe in luck and thought that everyone created their own future. Alas, now, at the age of 26, I know that sometimes a flick, no matter how small it may seem, can turn your life upside down and bury you under the ruins of your dreams. A few weeks passed without any news. I had to prepare for my exams. One day my mobile phone rang, an odd phone number which was made up of the number 8 only. The caller had somehow withheld their real number. I answered it. It was Dr. Sarbandai. He asked to arrange a meeting to visit the place that he wanted to convert into an office. I said that I was on leave from work as I was busy preparing for my exams. He said, "We shall leave it for later then." A few weeks later, I was at home when I received a call from the same odd number. Dr. Sarbandai asked me to meet him outside the post office on Sadr Bridge. I got ready to go, but my mother stopped me. She complained that I did not even know his phone number. My mother asked me not to go, but I begged. She agreed on one condition, that she would come with me. Like many other 19-year-olds, I did not want my mother to accompany me. I said that I was old enough to go on my own. I had uttered the same words on the day of registration for university. The night before the registration day, I had told myself that tomorrow all the students will come without their parents and I would be the only one with my parents. The next day, the courtyard in front of the university was filled with parents who had come to accompany and support their children. And I was the only lonely one. Despite this, I wanted to stand on my own feet. I begged her to let me go alone, but she did not let me. We left together. I waited outside the post office and my mother waited on the opposite side of the road. We waited for about half an hour. With my mother's signal, we gave up and went back home. On the way home, she complained as usual. She said, "Don't answer any more calls from this number. Even if he comes, do not work for him and pass the task to others in your firm." I knew that I would not do that. I wanted to start and finish this job all on my own, and be proud of my achievement at such a young age. I did not even want the contract to be drawn up between Dr. Sarbandai and the firm. In my mind, I was already drafting a contract between Dr. Sarbandai and myself. I used to think I could control everything on my own. I had gained some business skills. I had observed my father negotiating with other firms and writing up contracts on several occasions. Only a few days later, I received another call from the same odd number. It was Dr. Sarbandai again. A meeting was arranged in the evening at the top of Akdasa Street. I went. Mr. Shika was with him. I sat on the passenger seat in the back of the car. There was a microwave on the back seat. Dr. Sarbandai said that he had bought it to give it to his wife on Mother's Day. His mobile phone kept ringing. Mr. Shika said it was one of his relatives' wedding, wittingly, and that he must leave. Dr. Sarbandai spoke of his business, importing medicine, medical supplies, and equipment. I had previously worked at a firm that imported medicine and I knew that if he negotiated with me, I would receive unlimited printing jobs. Every day a new leaflet would have to be printed. Every day, a new printing assignment. Every day a new catalog. I suggested that I could take on the printing tasks and he accepted. He said he must first see how I work and design his practice surgery, and if it was of a satisfactory standard he would commission me for the printing jobs. He said he was negotiating with someone else too, but I insisted that he give all the work to me. Despite my boldness in asking for work, I was too shy to ask for his telephone number. Perhaps this was my biggest mistake. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, was 19 years old at the time and did not know what awaited me. I did not know that with every meeting I took a long step towards death. I got out of the car and went home. We arranged to meet at 6 p.m. on Saturday, July 7, 2007. It did not cross my mind at the time that the next 2 days would be the last days that I would spend at home. Then I would be thrown into a mire of suffering, crying, pain and silence. I did not know, and I spent those 2 days with joy and happiness. 2 happy days. I attended my friends' and my cousins' weddings. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, looked forward to the evening from the first hour that I started work on Saturday. At around noon, my phone rang as I was on my way back to the office from a visit at Reyhaneh company. He said he would pick me up from my office as he was in the area. I plucked up the courage and said, I do not have your phone number. If something comes up and delays me, I would not be able to inform you. He gave me a phone number. This gave me some confidence in him. I called my mother and told her that I had an appointment with Dr. Sarbandai and Mr. Shika, so I would be home later. She said, no, don't be too late. We are supposed to go out at 7 p.m. She wanted me to drive. I said I will try my best. Almost immediately, I received a text message from Dr. Sarbandai about the date. The text message said // It is rumored that where the day matches the month and the year, a certain force and energy is released. I had heard that 7 was a holy number. God created the heavens and the earth in 7 days. A week is equal to 7 days. There are 7 layers of heaven and sky. I thought to myself that Dr. Sarbandai believes in astrology and that he might even know a few things about Chinese horoscopes and the signs of the zodiac and personality types. I sent him a text message back, only a question mark. Later I sent him another text message, shall I wait for you, doctor? I lied to my colleagues and said that my father's friend was picking me up as my father wanted to buy me a new car. I received another text message from Dr. Sarbandai, I am outside, what is the building number? These few text messages were all that I exchanged with Dr. Sarbandai. Prior to this, I never had his phone number and I never sent him any text messages. It was 6 p.m. and I was waiting outside my office. My colleagues were watching us out of the window as Dr. Sarbandai arrived alone. Where is Mr. Shiki? I wondered. In my mind these two men were always together. I sat in the front passenger seat and we drove off, towards the trap, towards webs of spiders, towards pain and blood and screams. A modern tune was playing. I, Reyhaneh, 19 years old, loved modernism. I was proud of living in a century where technology was advanced and continued to develop to higher levels. I liked modern music and did not fully appreciate traditional genres. We talked about that tune and our taste in music. Several streets ahead he stopped. Mr. Shika got in the car. He sat at the back but I insisted that we swap places. He refused, stating that he had to get off in a short distance. And he did. Both men spoke outside the car for a few minutes. I could not hear them. Mr. Shika left and Dr. Sarbandai got back in the car. Now we were on Shahid Beheshti Street and he stopped again. Dr. Sarbandai said he had an elderly aunt and had to buy her a few things from the shop. He returned a few minutes later. He was carrying a packet of nappies and an orange plastic bag. Now we were on Murdamad Street. He parked outside the governor's building and asked the security guard to look after his car. A sudden rush of intense fear came over me. Who is this man that can park outside the governor's building? What status does he have that the security guard takes orders from him? I comforted myself and thought that even if he does have an authoritative position in the government, my impression of him is not of someone threatening. And I did not know that men can be like chameleons. They can change into any color, at any moment. We entered a building and went up in the lift. Perhaps if we had taken the stairs, I would have seen a pair of shoes outside a door or noticed a sign that it was a residential building and I would have heard the alarm bells ringing. Alas, the lift had swallowed all the signs. 5th floor. Next to the lift there was a door. Dr. Sarbandai opened it with his key. And I was shocked. It was not an office. This was a rundown residential flat filled with dirt and dust. Filled with chaos. There were no signs of life. No scent of domestic cooking or brightness of a home. It was a deserted place. I left the door open. There was a table near the door with a few chairs. I sat on one of the chairs nearest to the door. He probed me to make myself comfortable. But I was not comfortable. He probed me to take my headscarf off but I was afraid. The table was messy with various objects on it. Paper, key, mobile phone, glass, knife stand, flower pot and the general bric-a-brac. He went behind the table and into the kitchen. My eyes explored the room and drew everything in, near and far, anything and everything from the entrance door to the television, the sofa, the fan, the console, the mirror, the prayer carpet and even the small tables. He returned with 2 glasses of fruit juice and immediately drank one. He complained of the heat and invited me to drink. I was staring at the ice cubes in the glass. They were dancing. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, a 19-year-old girl, did not know at the time that this ball would end with the ballet of death. A dance following on from crying, bruising, deceit, hypocrisy, conspiracy and beating and beating and beating and pain and pain and pain. Yet again I ignored my gut instincts. I tried not to think negative thoughts. I told myself his face is not that of a dangerous man. But my throat felt blocked and I could not drink. I said let's get on with the work first. I got up quickly and inspected the rooms. I looked out of one of the windows. How high it was from the ground. I wondered what would happen if someone fell out of that window. What a useless thought. I drew everything on a piece of paper and took notes. I returned. He immediately turned away from the prayer carpet and walked towards me. The sofa was now covered with a bed sheet. My mind went blank. My mouth dried up and my throat still felt blocked. My eye caught the door. It was closed. I sat on the chair and shuffled my papers. He had come closer. He took out a small packet and showed it to me. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. I knew. Fear seized my soul. I stood up. I seemed smaller and weaker sitting down. He came forward. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, on that day, was soaked in my sweat. Just as I am now at the age of 26 and casting my mind back to what I endured. Even now, as I am dissecting this festering tumor, I am soaking with sweat. From that moment on, I knew that all of my dreams were burning. In a fever that I did not know how to control. I saw the flight of death in that house, the darkness and decay, the smoke, the pain. And now I want to end my old nightmare. I tried to write many times but I abandoned it unfinished each time. Because putting a knife to this old wound is more agonizing. But at this hour of an endless night, in Ward 2 of Shar prison, under the moonlight and in the silence of the prison, without any whispers, I spew my pain. I cannot do anything except to tell my story, to the patient's stone asterisk that I know from the legends that I heard in my childhood. If I don't tell, I die. So I will confess my sufferings to the stone until it cannot bear it anymore and bursts. Perhaps then my pain would end. Perhaps then my voice would sing again. I died when I picked up the knife. And since then I pretended to live. I only waited for day to turn to night and for the night to turn to day. My soul died. My delicate soul died at the age of 19. I spent many nights with my nightmares. Dreaming of the death of animals that I had rescued. The pain of any living being always hurt me. And all these years, the past 7 years, were filled with sorrow and pain. The sorrows of girls who have a sad story each. Like me. Like Facte, a fellow prisoner, who I witnessed being hanged. I have learned from these years that death is not a means to end pain. Perhaps it is a new beginning. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, 26 years old, am not scared of death. But Reyhaneh, the 19-year-old, was. You have no way of escaping. The sentence that turned my world black. As black as my hair. The hair that a few months later began turning white. I am Reyhaneh Jabbari, 26 years old. I am closer to death than any other time in my life. I am not afraid of death. A few years ago, all my worldly belongings were brought here, atop a bunk bed in Shar prison. I have no attachments to this world, my only wish is that my mother and father forget all about me. This world, both its beauty and ugliness, are for those who adore it. I have never wanted to commit suicide, not before prison and certainly not after it. All I am saying is that I am not attached to this world. Just like one does not have a particular bond to a piece of clothing, you can change it or even throw it out without sadness. Life is much like that for me, a piece of clothing that covers my body regardless of its quality and beauty. Life in this world is like clothes, all different colors. Everyone is waking up right now in this prison, and so everything starts all over again. Last night I could not sleep as I was going over and over of what happened to me that day. On July 7, 2007 I was frozen in that chair, I could not move. Even now that I am writing this I am soaked in sweat. My legs were frozen, I could not run, he was extremely close to me. Suddenly I got up, turned the doorknob, but it was locked. I could not get out. I banged on the door. I tried to scream but my voice was not coming out. He was mocking me with his eyes. He said, "Where are you going to go? You can only leave here when I want you to leave." I was moving around but he was still. My back was against the entrance, I was facing him. He started to look bigger and bigger to me, even his arms looked huge. I was getting smaller and smaller in that room. I was wearing a black scarf and a long jacket with overlapping collar. Underneath I was just wearing a top. How I wish it was winter so I would have had a thick coat on so I would not have been able to feel the heat from his hands when he touched me. He pulled at my collar. I hit his hand. He caught my hand in mid-air when I think I scratched him, but I am not sure exactly where. His face turned totally red. He put both his arms around my body, his arms encircled my entire body. I wished my arms were free and that he had grabbed me under my arms, not over them, so I could hit him with my hands on his chest. But I only managed to hit him on his stomach. I had never thought about how important hands were until that moment, about how much I needed them. He lifted me up and with half a turn put me down on the floor. I only managed a whimper, nothing else was coming out of my throat. He put his arms around my waist. The movement of his hands on my body grossed me out. "You are stuck now, aren't you?" he said. "I am going to take care of you," he added. His voice was so close, in my ears. Sweat was dripping on my neck from my head. With one hand he grabbed my waist and with the other he pulled my head back by pulling my hair. He then put his cheeks against mine and emphasized, "No one is here, no one can hear you." Anytime I think of my hopes and dreams, I start to cry. When I fall asleep thinking of the hopes I had for my future, I dream of myself on my wedding day wearing a white dress. Then slowly the dress turns from white to black, my eye makeup looks like I have been crying, my face is covered with black tulle and I see myself holding a bouquet of dried up dead flowers. I have never told a soul about this until now. No one knows how I was forced to give up the love of my life. I had to. When I was 19 I had no idea that my life would go up in smoke in that house and that a few years later, the courts would decide to make me into ashes. That day, when I was 19, I could hear him breathing in my ear. He had me pinned down. I could not move, I had surrendered like a small lamb. I was angry with myself that I could not manage to scream. If you catch a bird in your hands, it will try to fight but it will eventually stop fighting when you hold both of its wings. All you will hear is the bird's heartbeat in your hand because it has surrendered to its fate. Then I suddenly started thinking of how in love I was with A. I remember how happy I had been when my mother had told me that soon we should have a wedding in our house. We invited many friends and family when my uncle and his wife were visiting us. That night we had a party where A was formally introduced to my uncle. I was so ecstatic when my uncle referred to A as the groom of the family. I could not contain my joy. I remember back when I was starting to choose a husband, my boss had introduced his son to me by phone. His son lived in Canada. After a few text messages and phone conversations I realized I did not like him for marriage. So I said yes to A's marriage proposal. My father was uneasy with me getting married. He believed women should finish their studies and only get married when they can stand on their own feet. My father asked was that we got to know each other well. My mother's younger brother gave me some advice that would come back to haunt me later in my trial. He said if I really wanted to know A, I should see how he reacts in anger and that I should make him angry on purpose and study his reaction. Just for fun I did make her angry a few times. I had no idea that those incidents would come up in my trial later, saying that I hated my fiancé. I was only 19 years old. I was so inexperienced that I had no idea how that sort of thing would impact the future. The very future that I would never be allowed to have. Then suddenly I saw a knife. I told him to please let me go and I would not breathe a word. He moved away a bit and asked me, "Let you leave? Ha, where?" I kept thinking of A, which gave me courage and strength. We were staring at one another straight in the eye. He said, "What? You are going to stab me? Seriously? Go ahead, do it." He turned his back to me and taunted me, "Go, hit me, I want to see how you do it." I felt so small. I put my head down. He yelled at me, "Go ahead, do it." I felt helpless. I looked the knife. It was too small to even scare him. He was laughing. I started to run through a small kitchen that had an attached balcony. He yelled, "We still have time." I opened the balcony door and thought of jumping. I looked down. I imagined what it would be like. I could not bring myself to jump. I went back in. He was by the TV where there was a prayer mat. He said, "What are you doing?" I begged him to let me go. I told him he was a religious man and to not do this to me. He told me to stop playing games and that it was nothing. I started crying, which I hated to do. Then he said I was depressing him. I told him that I swore and promised I would not tell anyone if he just let me go. He started to move towards me, I moved back, he moved forward, I moved back some more. I told him to stop or I would stab him. He said, "Why don't you do it already?" I positioned the knife in my hand. He got angry and said, "You are just pretending. Why are you pretending? You can't do anything." I had finally found my voice. I yelled at him to move back. He did not. I yelled that I would stab him. He turned red and said, "Go ahead, do it." I was breathing very shallow, there was not enough air. I raised my hand and with all my hopes and dreams in my mind I stabbed him. He turned around in shock and asked, "Did you stab me?" I could see blood coming on his clothes. I told him to let me take out the knife. He turned around and went the other way. In a panic, I started to look for the key to let me out of the apartment on the table. I looked at him. He was sitting on the floor. He pulled out the knife out of his back. The blood splattered on the mirror and on the fan. I saw blood flying around in the air. He was leaning against the wall. He threw the knife at me but I ducked. He missed. I picked up the knife. He then started to get up from the floor by using the chair. His hands were drenched in blood. He picked up the chair and threw it at me. It landed, made a terrible loud noise and broke into pieces. I had never seen blood before that day, nor had I heard such fighting and yelling. I had never been in such a situation before. Again I could not scream, my voice froze again. He was extremely angry. He came at me and punched with his bloodied hand. I ran towards the door and tried opening it by stabbing the door. It was locked. Then I heard the sound of key turning in the door. I was kicking the door. The door opened. It was shaky, the man for whom I would later be beaten and tortured, whose face I still remember in the door frame, the man who I had always known as Sarbandai's shadow, as they were always together. He asked what was going on. But I ran out of the door, because now there were two of them and they would surely kill me. I did not wait for the elevator, I took the 7 to 8 stairs down. I could hear Sarbandai running out after me yelling, "Thief, thief!" Then I heard the elevator door open and I ran in. As the elevator door was closing, I saw Sheikha leaving the apartment with some documents in his hands. I do not know whether he went upstairs or downstairs. When I arrived on the street, I rubbed my hands on my black coat. I dialed the paramedics and told them there had been an incident. When the ambulance arrived, I saw a woman in her 50s with a cream color coat going around the ambulance and crying. The ambulance door closed and it left. I knew that he would be okay because the murdered hospital was very close, so close that if you cut your artery, you would arrive there before you bled to death. I took down the number of the ambulance. My phone rang. It was my mother. I was in a taxi with the knife in my purse. She was angry that I had not been home earlier as we were supposed to go out together. She had wanted me to go home early. I had tried to move the meeting with Sarbandai to the next day, but he refused as he said he had to travel the next day to England or Spain, I cannot remember which. I had told my mother not to worry, that either Sarbandai or Sheikh would drop me off. I told her I would be home soon. I have not seen my house for so long now. I miss all aspects of my house, its fragrance, kitchen, light, warmth, windows, walls, and silence. I must admit I miss home a lot, a home that many women in prison have never experienced. And I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. It has been many years since I last was at my home. I have been away from my home because of blood and pain. Now that I am silently reflecting, Section 2 of Sharare prison is in a lot of commotion. The past few days they have shut down the yard, so we have constantly been walking around inside the halls. It is very stuffy in here, and the worst thing is that they have also closed down the activities unit. Time goes by very slowly, so I have taken refuge on my bed to escape the insane commotion and am immersed in my thoughts. What am I doing here? What happened to my home? And then I remember what happened to me. When I was 19, I survived a struggle with a huge man and managed to escape. I had freed myself from arms that could have easily crushed my neck. I was standing in front of the door, tired and frustrated. I entered the house. My body temperature was unsteady. I was hot for a moment and cold and shivering a second later. My mother was washing fruit. She stopped working as soon as she saw me. She looked at me. I took off my headscarf immediately. If she had looked at me closely, she could see the blood. She asked, "What has happened?" I lied and said, "I was in an accident." She said, "But you didn't drive today." I replied, "I had a very bad accident in my friend's car." She muttered, "I have told you repeatedly not to drive other people's cars. It is bad luck for us." During our childhood, she had told us that for their wedding night my father had borrowed and decorated a friend's car which broke down. So, not only had the groom arrived late, but also he had to pay the cost of fixing the car. I wanted so badly to hug her and tell her what had happened, but I couldn't. The thoughts and images were devastating me. I went to my room, changed my clothes, took the knife out of my purse and put it under my bed. I lay down on my bed, closed my eyes hoping to sleep. However, the conversations, the laughs, the heat of his hands, my weakness, the height of the balcony, the knife, blood, and blood kept flooding my mind. I was restless and could not concentrate. My mom came to my room. She had brought cold water and an apple. I refused them both. She said, "Get up. Don't be a baby." I drank the water and felt a bit better. She held my hand, stared into my eyes and said, "Tell me what happened. Why are you so restless?" I hid my eyes from her. She has an amazing talent in reading my eyes. I didn't want her to know what had happened. She started massaging my hands as I lay on the bed and asked, "So, how bad was the accident?" I said, "It was terrible." She asked, "Did you hit someone?" "No. Thank God." "Then it is not important." "Mom, I think there was major damage." She said, "It doesn't matter how much the damage is. Be thankful that you didn't hit a person and you were not injured. It would have been better if you had not gotten into an accident, but it happened and it is now in the past." I calmed down for a few moments. She lay next to me, put her hand on my neck and stroked my hair. My head was on her chest and my entire being was filled with security and peace. I felt free in her warm kindness. She whispered in my ear, "When I see you in turmoil, it is as if someone stabs me in the heart. I want you not to be sad. And I was sad. She asked, what happened to your business with Sarbandai and Shaikh? Did you go? I sighed and said, yes I did. She asked, did you make a deal with him? I said, no, I don't want to do the job. She said, oh, that is good. I never had a good feeling about them. She asked, did they give you a ride home? I said, yes. I wanted to cry loudly from the bottom of my heart and tell her what had happened, but I didn't. But what could I say when telling her would be like stabbing her in the heart? I said, I want to sleep. She said, go to sleep. I will call you when dinner is ready. I used to kiss each of her fingers. She would touch my face with her hand after I did that and then touch her lips with her hand. We used to do this as long as I remember. Even later when she visited me in prison, we sometimes played this game from behind the window. However, we haven't played the game in the past few years. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and confess that I miss my mother's embrace. It is more than 18 months that we see each other from behind the window. Sharare prison doesn't allow in-person visits outside the glass window, and all prisoners should dream of the scent, the warmth, and security of their families in their imaginations. Here in prison, we are not just deprived of food and water, but deprived of all sorts of things. Mom turned off the light and left my room. And I kept remembering my fierce struggle with that man again and again. I was tired. I pressed my face to the pillow and cried uncontrollably. I wanted to fall asleep, wake up after a few moments, and breathe a sigh of relief and say, how wonderful, it was all a dream. But sleep was escaping me. My cell phone rang a few times. I don't remember who called me and what we talked about. I was suspended between reality and delusion and could not differentiate between the two. I had a distorted sense of reality and was mixed up about time and place. My arms and legs kept twitching as if I was fighting with him again. My arm was bruised and in pain. I could smell the dinner my mom had made and hear her call me, dinner is ready, Reyhaneh. I could not get up. I had not eaten since noon and was very hungry but didn't have the energy to move. I wished that she would bring my dinner to me, like some other nights, but she didn't. I tried to move, but couldn't. It felt like I was paralyzed. She called me again, aren't you coming, Reyhaneh? I couldn't respond. I was struggling and screaming inside but I was motionless and silent. Mom opened the door. I saw her through half-open eyes. She didn't see my beseeching eyes, whispered, have sweet dreams my love, closed the door and left. And I was left in my room, bombarded by the thoughts of the incident. I don't know how much time had passed when I woke up with the sound of my phone ringing. I took a deep breath and answered. All of a sudden I was completely alert. I heard a strange man's voice saying that someone has had an incident and my number was among those he had called. Then he asked, do you know Dr. Sarbandai? I replied, yes. Did you only talk to him on the phone or did you meet him in person? I met him in person. What time did you meet him? At 6 o'clock p.m. He said excitedly, so, you know he has been injured? I replied, yes, how is he doing? He said he was doing fine, but you have to come to police station number 104 in Abbas Abbot. Hearing the silence at home, I could tell everyone was sleeping. I asked, why do I need to come? Just for investigation and some questions. I said, I can't come now, but I will be there first thing in the morning. He said, it can't wait until tomorrow. You have to come right now. I thought to myself, what an idiot, doesn't he realize a girl can't get out of the house alone at this time of night? To get rid of him, I said I am not in Tehran right now and hung up. I was wide awake. I left my room. Mom had fallen asleep while watching TV. I went in the kitchen to eat something, but didn't feel like it. I just got a glass of water, returned to my room and lay on the bed. My phone rang again. It was the same voice. He forcefully said, we are in front of your house. Come and open the door or we will come in, and we are armed. I said, who are you? Police. Wait, I will be down right away. I went down with difficulty and opened the door. There were 3 men at the door. One of them seemed to be the chief and I found out later his name was Shamlu. He was the inspector at Branch 1 of Criminal Office, the one I wrote about while I was in solitary confinement and gave him the title, Old Lizard. He was the one who after my arrest stung me with his words, like a lizard. The other one was Kamali, the officer from Bureau No. 10 of Shahpur Investigation Office. The third one was the driver, Abadi. Shamlu started asking me questions right there. I told him what had happened in that apartment. He said, we know. Where is the knife you used? In my room. Should I bring it? No, you can't go in alone. We will come with you. The 3 of us went inside. Abadi stayed out. Shamlu stayed in the front yard and Kamali went in my room with me. My younger sister, whom we called Bayduk, was awake. She saw us with inquisitive eyes of a 13-year-old. With a gesture, Kamali told her to be quiet. Bayduk covered her head with the sheet. I could tell she was trembling. I entered my room with Kamali. Took the knife from under my bed and gave it to him. He asked, what were you wearing at the time? A moment later, he had all the 3 pieces that reminded me of the most horrifying time of my life. He ordered me to leave with him. As I left the room, all of a sudden I saw my mom, who screamed softly and asked, who are you? I said, Mom, calm down. She quickly covered herself, faced Kamali and asked again, who are you? What are you doing in my house? She was about to call my dad when Kamali pulled his jacket aside and showed her something that caused her to bring down her voice. She said, don't show me your gun, sir. Who are you? He kept ordering us to be quiet but did not explain anything. Shamlu, who had heard the noise, entered the room. Mom was even more scared. She leaned on the wall, sat on the floor and asked, what is going on here? He introduced himself and said, your daughter has hit a pedestrian and fled the scene. My mother looked at me with disbelief and said, Reyhaneh, did you lie? You hit a pedestrian? Why didn't you take him to the hospital? Is he dead? Oh my God! Worried and puzzled, she started asking me questions angrily. Was it a man or a woman? Shamlu stopped her, saying, we can't talk here. Everything will be clarified at the Abbasabad police station. Mom said, let me wake up her father and we will come with her. He said, no, we will take her and you can come separately. I put on my slippers and left. I didn't kiss my mother, didn't even say bye to her, didn't take a good look at the house, and didn't say farewell to my room. I had no idea what was in store for me. I thought I would return home in a few hours and would go back to sleep. I sat in the car and we left. The driver didn't know the area and I guided him to find his way back. On the way there, they asked me what had happened and I told them everything. Excitedly, Kamali said, yes, we have kept the condom as evidence. And Shamlu said, this one evidence will save your life. Based on the evidence in article number 60. You have legitimately defended yourself and there is no reason to worry. I didn't understand the meaning of what he said. I noticed a few missed calls from my mom and sent her a quick and loving text message. In it, I said, it looks like I will be done by the morning. My phone is running out of batteries so I will turn it off. Don't worry, my love. Shamlu said, you are not allowed to use your cell phone. And he took my phone away. We arrived at a small square where the branch 104, Abbasabad police station was. We went up the stairs and entered a room. I sat on a chair and everyone left. I was sitting in a dark, unfamiliar space all by myself. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and confess that I didn't understand the signs from the universe when I was 19. I should have realized what days were awaiting for me when I was quietly sitting in that room. I should have realized that my future would be dark and gloomy. I should have felt the half-dark room. I didn't realize, didn't know, and didn't understand. About an hour later, they took me to another room. There was a long table with chairs around it. It was filled with grim-looking men. I sat on a chair right across from Shamlu. He asked what had happened and I replied that I had already told him everything in the car. One of the men said, "Tell us too." I retold the incident. They asked me about details and I answered. I was tired. We left the building at 6 o'clock in the morning. The grim men left and Shamlu and Kamali stayed with me. I saw Mom and Dad. They looked distressed. I wanted to hug them but they didn't let me. They talked by the door for a short time. Kamali said, "Don't worry. Your daughter has killed A." Shamlu confirmed. Mom asked, "Was he an addict?" "No." "Was he a drug dealer?" "No." "Don't think about it. Just come to the inspector's office number 10 on Shahpur Street at 11 am. Dad asked, "Have they drawn a sketch of the accident?" Kamali laughed and I felt so ashamed in front of my mom and dad's nobility. They didn't even know what had happened. I got in the car. Mom sent me a kiss and waved. I kept looking at them until I couldn't see them anymore. Shamlu got out of the car and I followed Kamali to a building that was called Shahpur Inspector's Office. Kamali asked, "Do you know what Vada is?" I replied, "What?" He said, "Vada. Have you ever heard the name?" I replied, "No." He said, "Do you know who this man was?" I said, "Yes, he was a plastic surgeon." He said, "You really don't know anything. How did you not know who he is?" I asked, "Who is he?" He said, "He was a government authority." Then he stopped short of finishing his sentence and said, "Leave it alone, it is not important." It was 6:30 am and the office was unoccupied of the employees who arrived in a couple of hours. I followed an officer downstairs for fingerprinting. I saw Mom and Dad. Mom talked to the officer and Dad could kiss me. When he was kissing me, I dared to whisper in his ear, "They are making it a political case." We then went to a small room on the first floor. A blonde woman and a photographer were waiting there. I had a hard time standing straight when they took my picture. I was extremely tired and hungry. I had not slept for even a minute since I had woken up the day before. I badly needed to go to the bathroom. But together with Kamali and a private, I got into a car that was in the parking lot and was driven to an unknown location. They handcuffed me for the first time and I felt the cold and hard handcuff on my skin. They took me to the third floor of Branch 1 of the inspection office, an old building across from Tehran University. Shamlu was there. He asked how I was and told us to go to the first floor. We kept going up and down the stairs. I was tired and beat and the stairs were never ending. We went into a room filled with reporters. I retold everything from the beginning. I was impatient and thinking, how many times do I have to repeat telling this? I was tired of the repetition. I wanted to close my eyes, and then I had to go up the stairs to the third floor again. I sat on the green chairs in the hallway. There was a water fountain nearby and I was extremely thirsty, but how could I drink with handcuffs on? I was too proud to ask for water. In Shamlu's room, I had to repeat everything again. My voice was echoing in my head now and it was as if someone else was talking. They took me to the inspection office again. The people there were so lucky. They could easily drink water and could probably go to the bathroom. They took me to the detention center. The person in charge was an ugly woman with a hairy face. She said, "You killed your boyfriend." I said, "No," and she mumbled, "All of you say the same thing at first. Everything will be clear later." I didn't understand what she was saying then. However, I saw something the next day which made me realize what she meant. She brought an old nail clipper and clipped my nails extremely short, almost cutting my skin. I remembered when my grandmother saw a girl biting her nails, she would say, "The Prophet has said women should cut their nails a bit above skin." I was in pain and about to cry, but pretended to be okay. She sent me to a room with nothing in it except for the carpet covering the floor. There were a few other women there. One of them had strange lesions on her hand unlike anything I had ever seen before. Later on I found out these are the remnants of something called self-mutilation. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and have seen many women who, when angry, cut their hands or body with a knife or broken glass or any sharp object till blood gushes out. They calm down when they see the blood. The lesion goes away but their flesh becomes disfigured until another time when they need to see the blood gushing out. I get sick even thinking about it. I have never felt like doing this even when I was extremely worried and upset. But when I was 19, out of fear, I told the women in the detention center that I had killed someone. My eyes were tired. There was no place to sleep. I managed to lie down on the floor and put my feet up on the wall. My share of this room was just the size of my upper body. I closed my eyes for a moment. An agent came and said, "This is not the time for sleeping. All of you should sit down." We all sat. This room was at the end of a hallway. It had a dishwashing sink and 2 bathrooms and showers with half doors. There were 2 other rooms that were called solitary cells. I was extremely tired and hungry. In the evening, they gave us each 1 potato and a blanket. For breakfast, they gave us a piece of bread the size of a matchbox and some cheese. There was no room to sleep. The only outlet to outside was through a small air duct. I didn't have a watch and was unable to tell the time. I had never slept on a hard floor in my jeans. The blanket had a foul smell. 12 of us were breathing in that small room. I had never seen an addict before, and that night an addicted woman kept throwing up right by me. Despite all these discomforts, I passed out. I fell asleep. Saturday morning and Sunday had ended when I awoke. They woke us up. My body was beat and in severe pain. They called my name through the speaker, handcuffed me and took me to branch 10. This time I looked carefully. I was in a big room with tables all around. The walls were short and made of black stone. There was a small door to a glass room with a table and some chairs. They took me there. 2 bearded old men were sitting there. They ordered my handcuffs to be undone and asked someone to bring tea for me. Even though it was summer, I was extremely cold. My voice trembled and my teeth chattered when I talked. The old men said they were not from this office and that they had come from the leadership office. They just wanted to know what had really happened. They merely listened. They didn't take notes and I wasn't asked to write anything. And through the entire process I never saw them again. I returned to the detention center. The blankets were not there anymore. They brought lunch, a little rice that was red and foul smelling, but there was no room for complaining. My body was still aching. I was not allowed to lie down and closed my eyes while sitting. My head felt extremely heavy. The next day, Tuesday, I was taken to Shamlu's room early in the morning. Sitting on the green chairs in the hallway, I saw Mom and she saw me. She ran to me to give me a hug. Kamali said, "Don't get close." She leaned on the wall across from me and fell to the floor. She said, "I am sitting here to see you." I could hardly keep my head straight but I sat erect. I could see horror and worry in her eyes. Dad came later. He had been looking for a parking space and Mom had not wanted to wait and had come earlier. Shamlu started the inspection again and said, "This case is very costly for us. You have to say something else." And I didn't know what he was talking about. That afternoon, I was sitting and facing the wall in branch 10 of the inspection office. They had instructed me not to turn around. I could hear 2 people screaming while getting close to me. From their accents, I could tell they were Afghanis. Some people were hitting and cursing them. The Afghanis were begging for mercy. They were forced to run around the big room. I could hear their heavy breathing when they passed by me. I could see the blood trace as they ran. I was really scared. Later on I found out that they were let out of this small door and forced to run so that their solace wouldn't get swollen after flogging on the solace of the fee. I had to sit in front of this black stoned wall repeatedly through the process. I used to stare at the wall and look at the shadows reflecting on it. Every time a shadow was getting close, I would press my teeth so that they would not break if they hit me in the head. I would keep my neck erect to lessen the force of impact. That day, 2 men came near me. One was a chubby man with a stubble whose name I never understood and another man whose name was Colonel Karami. The chubby man said, "Tell me how the murder happened." I told him what had happened. He said, "Don't play games, girl, and tell us the truth." I said, "What I told you is the truth." Karami jumped and pulled my hair from behind. He pulled my head back forcefully, just like Sarbandai had done. My neck was cramped. As he held my hair, he dragged and threw me in the room with the small door. There was a table and a chair. 2 other chairs were across the room. I sat behind the table. They gave me a piece of paper and a pen. They told me to write and I wrote. When I was attacked by Dr. Sarbandai, I stabbed him with a knife 1 time. Suddenly, Karami hit me in the head from behind. It was sudden and I had not kept my neck erect. My head hit the table. He took the paper and ripped it. He said, "Write again. Write the truth." Karami left the room and the chubby man said, "This is not a joke. If you cooperate we will tell the judge and he will reduce your sentence. Tomorrow, they are going to arrest your entire family. Don't you have mercy on them?" I felt like crying. I said, "Believe me, I told you the truth. Why did he hit me? What should I have written?" He said, "He hit you? You call that hitting?" I replied, "I don't have anything else to say and will write the same things." He said, "Does someone need to make you?" Karami returned to the room with 2 other men. One was tall and bearded and the other was average height with no beard. The 2 sat on chairs. The chubby man was behind me. Karami yelled, "Will you write or not? So far you have given us nonsense. Now tell us the truth." The chubby man said, "No, she is going to cooperate. She will write soon. Just give her a little time. She is putting her thoughts together." Again, I wrote what I had written before. The chubby man pulled my head back and the unbearded guy slapped me a few times on both sides. Left, right. Left, right. This was the first time I was hit in my life. Karami was yelling, "What was the man's name?" I said, "Sarbandai." He yelled louder, "What was his first name?" And I didn't know. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, 19 years old, had killed a man whose first name I did not know. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. As before, I am currently sitting on my bed in the Shahreh prison, recounting the bitterest days of my life. The days that upon reflection open my wounds again and I feel as if I spew blood. When I was 19 years old, I encountered men who I believed I could persuade to converse in a civilized manner. I thought I'd talk and they would listen. Men who I never could have imagined to be violent if I had met them somewhere other than the Shahpur police quarters. But I can daringly say that they were dark-hearted monsters that wore human masks. During the course of my interrogation day after day, time lost its meaning for me. Just like the hands of a clock, I too was taken from one place to another. Sometimes, I was taken to the criminal court. And the highlight of the day, an interrogation session with Shamlur, would draw the day to an end. But an ominous day began in the course of my interrogations and I spent the days like an animal in a slaughterhouse. The interrogator's heavy-handed smacks made my ears so hot that I could not feel the pain anymore and I was no longer tormented. Karami repeatedly put a piece of paper in front of me and I wrote and he tore. Sometimes I saw Colonel Kamali. He frowned and asked questions. I wrote. He did not tear. Did not strike. Did not curse. He only read what I wrote. Sometimes I saw a faint trace of a smile on his lips which made me hopeful. He spoke very fast as if he was always in a hurry to get my answers. And when I was done writing answers to his questions, he picked them up quickly and left. I don't recall how many days had passed. I was very tired and dirty. I wanted to take a bath so badly. The dirt on the floor of the police station cell had made my entire body filthy, and the sweat that dripped during my interrogation sessions left a muddy track on my face and hair. I had returned from court and the indefinite questioning session with Shamlu. All the way back I prayed to return to the detention center in order to get some sleep. Even if I had to sleep whilst sitting up. I wanted to rest my tired brain and have some peace of mind. But God did not hear. As soon as I arrived at Shahpur police quarters, I was taken to Bureau number 10. 3 monstrous men were waiting for me in a small room. Karami was not there. As soon as I entered, they handcuffed me to a chair and forced me sit on the floor. I was tired. I rested my head on the seat of the chair. I did not recognize their voices. They screamed one after another, "You think you are very smart? Stronger people than you have been reduced to nothing here. You pest, who do you think you are? Answer every question loudly." Shika was there, wasn't he? I replied. He got off the car on the way there, but when I was about to escape he opened the door. I felt something on my back. I felt the swelling of my skin. And then, rip! My skin cut open. It only began to feel ablaze after I heard the rip sound through my nerves. It burned. And I screamed from the bottom of my heart. My ears hurt from the sound of my own scream. I did not hear the sound of the whip. It was not a whip. It was not a rope. It was not a piece of wood. I never figured out what those 3 fierce dragons used to burn me over a few days. I could only hear myself screaming, "God damn you!" And he inflamed my back even harder. And I had fallen on the floor, belittled and degraded, drowning in my saliva, snot, and tears. My arms had become completely numb as I twisted and turned under the excruciating pain with my hands tied to the chair higher than my body. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am now 26 years old. The pale scars where my skin burst can still be seen on my back. Upon my return to the detention center, a few prostitutes and addicts softly stroked my split skin and recited a prayer from the Quran to comfort me. And for the first time in my life, I saw signs of kindness in these women. The women whom I would have frowned upon and looked away from if I had seen them on the street. And for the first time, I saw an addict cry for me and whisper in my ears, "I hope these bastards all die." And those ghastly and bitter days ended with my confession. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, confessed that from the first meeting with Sarbandai and Shiki, I realized that they worked for the Ministry of Information, the intelligence service. I confessed that I knew how to spell Vada and its meaning. I had just realized what Kamali had asked me on that early morning. When I was 19, I wrote everything that I had told to those 3 monsters on a piece of paper that Kamali had given me, and he read it. He looked at me, drew his lips in and left. I want to finish this part as soon as possible because I am afraid that there is not much time left to write. I am giving these letters to a kind woman who will be released soon. I have always told my mum that I have left her plenty of letters as inheritance. I have given her many letters over the past few years. Almost everything. Except a few that Shamlu confiscated and never returned. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. And although the traces of pain are still on my soul and body, I don't hate those monsters. I don't even hate the chubby man who jumped and pressed on my toes with his industrial-style boots. He caused my toenail to break, and even to this day the toenail is not straight and the skin around it is bruised. I don't hate them, because a little later I met people who were even more violent than them. It was upon meeting them that caused me not to want to have long hair anymore. I realized that long hair is a weakness for every woman when fighting with 1 man, 2 men, several cowards. Hair that creates beauty can become a rope to pull a woman when wrapped around a man's hand. It becomes the cause of a pain that twinges your eyes, prickles your ears and turns to a scream in your mouth. And I gradually realized this is the nature of some people's jobs. There are people who live in cities, have children, go to parties, celebrate happy occasions and commemorate sad ones, say prayers and promise God to share what they have with their neighbors, shop and laugh, but generate their income by creating hellfire for others. I have no complaints about these people in this world, but in the next world I am the plaintiff and they are the accused. I have forgiven them in this world and have thus started a new phase of my life. I was transferred to Evin Prison's solitary confinement, with an injured body and a destroyed soul from the final words of Shamlu, "Your parents don't want you anymore. They have said, kill her, we never had such a daughter." And I was hopeless and lonely while my back and shoulders had dried up blood from my injuries. I was thrown into a 9-meter carpeted room with a knee-high wall, a toilet, shower and a sink. The walls were full of stains and writings. They brought me 2 rough and foul-smelling blankets. So this was Evin Prison, the prison I had heard all about in family parties when older people talked about it in the Shah's era. I lied on my stomach. For many hours I could not believe the silence. I could still feel the screams, mixed with the unbearable pain in my back. Oh my God, what am I going to do with this loneliness? Why have I become forsaken? Do I have to be lonely the rest of my life and never see my parents and sisters? Does this mean, if someday we see each other by accident they will turn away from me? Oh God, how I have always loved and still love them. I passed out and don't remember how long it took before I woke up. In solitary confinement, many times I would wake up after having nightmares. In these nightmares, a hand would come in from the window and pull me out in a blink of an eye, or that same hand would take away my father and others and make them disappear, but I would stay where I was. I could not move despite desperate struggles and did not have a voice despite screams. I was in my new home for 2 months, a home that created the seed of vengeance in me, and it took me a few years to control it. One day, one of the guards gave me a card and told me the card was equivalent to having money. By then, my injuries had healed and I could take showers. That same day an old woman came to clean my cell. This was the custom at Evin. Women who were lonely and had no visitors had to work to earn telephone rights, and by selling their phone time to other prisoners would earn a living. Her name was Nessa. She was full of regret and disappointment. I gave her my card and asked her to buy me a pen and take as much money as she wants from the card. She brought me the pen together with a cookie with a golden stem. I was experiencing a new taste that reminded me of home and happier days. Now I had a pen. Shamlo had prohibited me from reading newspapers, having visitors, reading books, getting any news or reading the Quran. But I had a pen which was complemented by some papers I took from the trash cans when I took walks outside. I would put them in my pockets and bring them back to my cell. I started writing on little pieces of white paper. I expressed my anger, complained, got angry, cursed, and gave Shamlo a nickname, the Old Lizard. One sad afternoon, a woman opened the little door to give me food. Her name was Fakte. She said she had been sweeping the cashier section of the visitor area when a man and a woman came to deposit money for me. The woman had asked the cashier, "Will you really see Reyhaneh to give her this money?" When the cashier had confirmed, the man had said, "You are lucky, you get to see my daughter." I never forget the sense of happiness and hope Fakte brought for me. Her simple message assured me that the old lizard had lied about my parents disowning me. I gained strength, forgot all my pains and started writing letters to my family. I realized then that the money card had been provided by my parents for me while I was prohibited from having visitors. I realized that the pen that had cost me $10,003 was their gift to me. I still have that pen even though it is just a faded, empty big pen. However, that pen reminds me of many other things. When Shamlo confiscated my letters, which I will later talk about in detail, he introduced a new theory in my file. He had said, "You have great organizational skills. You have managed to find so much paper and start writing while I strictly ordered that you should be deprived of everything. Therefore, you have the ability to plan a murder systematically. I was shocked by his logic. He had never been in my situation to realize that some people who live in absolute poverty can provide you small things to help you live a little happier, even if a lizard tries to sharpen his teeth for you. And in this crazy life, fact A, the woman who flew by my cell and brought me the gift of hope was executed a few months later. That was when I realized for the first time that at times, they take a person who will never come back. A fluorescent light was always on in my solitary cell. I could never see the outside light to know whether it is day or night. I only realized it was daytime when workers and guards were busy walking about. And in the nighttime silence, I learned to hear things by putting my ear on the cold metal door and have conversations with the inmates in my neighboring cells through the little food doors. I had learned to stay up at nighttime. On one of those sleepless nights, I got to know Akram and Parvena. Akram was the wife of a clergy and I never understood why she was in prison. But Parvena had a different story. She had been in prison in the 1980s but had miraculously been saved from execution. Now she was in prison for supporting a man I didn't know but she told me about. His name was Osunlu and was apparently the head of the bus company's labor union. I could not understand why a person should be imprisoned for such a thing. I had told Parvena my injuries were getting healed and she constantly told me about the importance of resisting forced confessions. Sadly, she came to my life too late when I had already confessed everything, to participating in politics which I never understood and to all kinds of relationships. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, who had never been arrested before and had never done anything to even get a warning from the university's security office, confessed to illicit relationships with many people. And it was the old lizard who said any contact between a man and a woman who are not related, even a phone conversation, is a relationship. And I, who stayed away from even talking to people that I didn't know, confessed to what he wanted me to. Another night ended at the Shah-Ray prison and I have to get prepared to go to the cultural unit, quickly. Undoubtedly and very soon, I will write about all the atrocities the prison system, the interrogators and Shamlui did to me. I don't want to be buried and let my sufferings be forgotten. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. I have spent another day in a mass grave known as Shah-Ray prison which is filled with tension and feud, no air in the stifling atmosphere that has become more suffocating and toxic as the implacable prison guards spread hatred. I have taken refuge in my bed. Today, a simple children's game which could potentially put a smile on our face ruined the day because a spiteful prison guard intervened. The young prisoners, who are usually imprisoned for small crimes such as theft, failing to wear full hijab or swearing at officers, were playing with a water bottle. They placed the empty bottle on the floor and spun it around. The person to whom the bottle pointed when it stopped spinning, had to do a dare. It began with sweetness and laughter. The sound of laughters filled the room. Everyone, even if they were not in the game, was laughing from the sound of the players' laughters. Then the game turned into a real disaster as a scornful and devious prison guard, who does not like to see prisoners laughing, suggested hostile dares. The outcome was smacking by officers and licking the toilet. And I witnessed how laughters turned into loud voices, rapid breathings, swollen neck veins, red faces, fights, and then to punishment and tiredness. I like my bed. In this public place, it is the only space that is yours. Only yours. You can stick whatever you like to its ceiling. Or its side wall. I have some newspaper clippings of poems from a poet. Her name is Reyhaneh Jabbari. She is a few years older than me and lives in a city in Iran. Perhaps her emotions are triggered by her surroundings or the people who she meets and they inspire her to write a poem. Sometimes a poem from her is published in one of the newspapers that are available in prison. I cut it out and stick it to the wall of my bed which is made out of bed sheet. My bed is a lone cell in which I can gather my thoughts and cast my mind back to all the things that happened to me. It is a room for repairing my soul, a workshop in which I learned that if I do not cut my ties with life, death will not come to me. Everything that happened to me shows that if at the height of youthfulness and vivacity, when you cannot even tolerate hot or cold weather, cannot tolerate a simple and unpleasant word, cannot endure hunger or thirst, cannot withstand subjection to oppression, you are placed in a situation which is completely opposite to your current circumstances. You will display an incredible flexibility and will be even surprised by your own tolerance level. I remember when I was a child, I used to watch a cartoon called Barbapapa. Barbapapa was a species who had the ability to turn into various forms. This flexibility helped him to continue to live. When I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, was 19 years old, I became a Barbapapa. When I found out that my parents had not given up on me, I lived for the sake of their love. For days I was unaware of what was going on in the world, and I slept. As if to make up for all the sleep that I had lost in the past. I absorbed sleep with every single cell in my body, and as I was fed up with being forced to repeat the same endless confessions, I practiced remaining silent when I slept. It had been a while since I was last interrogated by Shamlu. Instead, two men with shaved heads, like soldiers, began interrogating me, or as it is more elegantly called, questioning me. One was fat and had a belly, and the other was slim and tall. They both had a stubble, but the slim one's mustache was longer than his beard. Many times they said that they had arrested my family and sent them each to a different prison. And in my heart, I cursed myself for ruining my family's peace and quiet by making acquaintance with Sarbandai and Shiki. I imagined them in a similar situation as me, belittled and weak like a chick, a term used by the aggressive interrogators. They tie your hands and your feet. Then, like a piece of clothing, they hang you up on a rod and beat you in the stomach with their knees. They don't care about where in the stomach they hit you. You must be smart, and despite the pain, try not to curl up in a ball, because if you bring your head down for a moment, the knee strike will connect with your eye or your nose or your mouth, and the blood will gush out and your face will fracture and you will suffer from an endless pain. I was aware of this and I protected my face from the knee strikes. The interrogator is a man and can never comprehend that during the monthly cycles, women feel numb and ache, they are lethargic and easily take offense. The mere task of getting up and answering questions is agony. The male interrogator does not know what it means to strike a woman in her breasts with a knee during her monthly cycle. I do not know why when women give birth to boys, they do not tell their sons how they feel, so that when their little son grows up and becomes an interrogator, he would know how to knee strike an accused in the stomach. An accused who turns out to be a woman and happens to be spending the most difficult days of her life. I was terribly fooled during one of my interrogating sessions. We have taken your mother from the detention center to Evan prison and we will interrogate her there. The following 2 days, I was left alone in my cell. They did not take me for questioning for 2 days and I, unaware of their devious plot, developed obsessive-compulsive disorder which completely ruined me only a few days later. The prolonged hours in the solitary confinement without an adjustable brightness, they torture you with the perpetual glow of the fluorescent light which is kept on 24/7. The fluorescent light irritates your soul. It is your enemy and you don't know what to do in order to change the situation. Whenever you want to think, you get distracted by the fluorescent light and you lose focus. Fragmented and disjointed thoughts destroy your sanity. You cannot focus on anything. If you want to eat or shower, you cannot open the water tap first, wash your head and then rinse and finish. When you lack intellectual coherency, you may leave the water running and get out of the shower without rinsing. It is possible that you pick up the food with the spoon in order to put it in your mouth, but before the spoon reaches your mouth, your mind gets distracted and when you regain awareness, you realize that the spoon is suspended in mid-air and you have just kept your open. You are also suspended between fantasy and reality, importance and truth. When I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, was 19 years, I used to stick my ears to the cold iron door of my solitary confinement 1,000 times a day in the hope of hearing my mother's voice, who I was led to believe was in one of the nearby cells. All of my being became ear and stuck to the door. But I could not hear any sounds from Shol Reyhaneh's mother's name. I was nervous and paced my 9-meter cell, from left to right, from right to the corner and from the corner to the door. There was no rhythm in my pace, and every once in a little while I twitched and became all ears again. I believed I could hear her voice. But it wasn't. I slept, or maybe I imagined that I slept. I had no logical explanation or real proof to know for sure that what I believed was real. My eyes saw things which disappeared a moment later. It made me more agitated. In order to become aware of where I was and in what circumstances, I used to slap myself, like the interrogators during the early days of the investigation. Those who had long gone out of my life and took their graves with them. When I slapped myself, it made a sound and was painful, therefore it was real. Therefore I was awake. But is it not possible to hear a sound in your dream? Oh God, why none of the lessons that I learned from school and university could help me to understand the true nature of these moments? And the painful struggle with my inability to grasp reality ended as I heard the sound of screaming coming from outside. I stuck my ear to the door. The sound was real and sustained. Woof, the screaming went on and then turned into a whimper. I was glued to the door. This is my mother. So they were telling the truth. They had arrested all of my family. I was traumatized and wanted to communicate with her. I screamed, Mama on Maman, which is mum in Persian. There was no answer. I screamed louder, Mama on. Still no answer. I banged on the door with my fist. I scratched it. I went back and lunged towards the door with all my body. The lunges became longer and longer. I fell backwards and hit the wall each time, but again with all of my power I lunged forward and hit the door. All of my body turned from ear to mouth and I screamed from the top of my lungs, Mama on. The small hatch in the door slid open. The spotty and hairy-faced guard who, despite the hot weather, was wearing a veil, peered through the wicket. She showered me with insults. I was enraged, and if the hatch was a little bigger, I would have punched her in the face. I said, "Shut up." It was my mother screaming. "They are beating my mother." She shouted for assistance, "Someone come and shut up this lunatic." And with a vulgar insult she closed the hatch. I was jumping up and down. The fluorescent light distressed me even more, and on the spur of the moment I decided to turn it off. I did it. I gathered all my thoughts and focused on destroying this enemy, the white fluorescent light, which was protected by a metal mesh. The mesh ruptured and the fluorescent lamp broke. For a moment, I was holding a broken piece of the lamp in my hand. I, Reyhaneh, Jabbari, at the age of 19, did not know that getting rid of the fluorescent light would be used as evidence to suggest that I had been trained. I did not know that this peaceful darkness would lead me to horrific accusations against me. Accusations to which I later confessed. I could barely hear the whimpering outside. I tried to remember how my mother sounded when she was ill and whimpered. I could not remember. I searched through my memories to find at least one incident. It was helpless. I even recalled the day when my little sister was born and I was 6 years old. I could remember everything except the whimpering sound of my mother. I could remember every detail about her face and the clothes that she was wearing and even the scent of her body, but I could not recall how her whimpering sounded. All I wanted at that moment was to know what had happened to my mother. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old, and now I know that when man is struggling with illusion and reality, he does not have any power. He is not able to make decisions and has no choice but to submit. Even if you scream and hit yourself against the wall, you are still weak. Your physical strength may increase, but due to lack of communication with the world around you, you develop a form of psychosis which makes you weaker and weaker, you reduce to nothing. You become nobody. Hollowed and devoid of any signs of life. Like narcotic drugs, delusion and hallucination lead you to idleness, thoughtless and without determination. The next day, or night, I was interrogated. Again, my body did not have the energy to move. My slim interrogator explained to me, "Your mother will be freed if you write." I duly wrote. After I stabbed Sarbandai, Shiki opened the door and came inside. He had a scuffle with Sarbandai and threw him on the floor. Sarbandai left the house and Shika, who had picked up a statute, went after him. I then left the house after him. When I returned to my cell, a new fluorescent lamp was illuminating. The cell was bright and I was tired and submissive as ever. I fell unconscious again. There was no whimpering sound anymore. Sometimes the silence outside was broken with the sound of somebody's footsteps. So he fulfilled his promise and released my mother. I was comfortable and sleeping made me even more comfortable. I recall when Shamlu said, "Your mother and father do not want you and they have abandoned you." I recall the day when it was Father's Day and I helplessly begged the prison guard, "For God's sake, allow me to make a single phone call to my father to speak to him for 1 minute. You also have a father. Let me say Happy Father's Day to him. For the love of God." And the prison guard, who lacked many human characteristics, did not comprehend my pleadings. He calmly replied, "It is not possible. The judge ordered to deprive you of everything. Telephone is prohibited for you." He did not know that if I had heard my father's voice for 1 second, I could have worked out if he had abandoned me at all or not. He did not know that by depriving me of hearing my father's voice, he led me towards mental obsession. He did not know that he crushed me. When I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, was 19 years old, I had to play in a new stage show every day. Play, a word in which there are many hidden meanings. In a play, always some people are entertained and some people entertain. I and my interrogators had to do both. A new play was written every day with varying degree of ridiculousness depending on the person interrogating at the time. One said that I had been recruited whilst at university and that they had tested my intelligence level. I scored 99%, they thought that I had cheated and tested me again and I scored 99% again. The intelligence officers told me that I was put in charge of the girls and a guy called Arash was put in charge of the boys. Another one who had been creating a different story said that you were supposed to carry out a mission in Cyprus. A man who owns a restaurant in Cyprus is the head of the whole operation. And I wrote these down. I wrote that I had been trained to wipe off my memory, I even had been trained to deceive the polygraph, I had been trained, they had trained me for espionage. When I was writing these, I thought to myself, have I done all of these? As if they had stretched out my 24-hour days into 100-hour days. How could anyone believe these? Every day, I woke up in the morning and my father dropped me off in Sadaqi. From there, I went to Karaj, a city about 20 kilometers from Tehran, and then took a coach to Gashvin, a city about 109 kilometers from Karaj, in order to attend university. At the end of the lessons, I returned to Karaj, took the metro back to Sadaqi and waited there for my father to take me home. During university holidays I worked at the firm and went home in the evening. When did I ever have any spare time to get trained? How can anyone train when there is not a single hour where their location is unknown? The university register and the firm's records show that none of these stories are true. I hoped at court, the trial judge would ask all of these questions and uncover the truth. A year and a half later at court, Judge Kukamarei raised important issues regarding the credibility of the investigation. In front of those who had accused me of cruelty, the judge with a strong Turkish-Iranian accent said, "Let's say that this girl was young and naive and she was fooled by appearance. Let's even say that she is a bad Muslim. Why did that man, the victim who was a devout Muslim and middle-aged, put himself in a situation where he was alone with a female stranger in a place which he owned?" And the answer was silence. The judge continued, "Do not speak in an unethical manner again in this court." After a couple of days of breathtaking trial which lasted several hours, when the judge announced that the court requires more time for closer examination, I knew that this judge could discover the truth about everything that happened to me. Alas, he was replaced by another judge, Hassan Tardast. I will describe him and his conduct when the time comes. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and reside at Shahray prison. I have not had access to any information sources or academic studies relating to judgment and prosecution, but I have experienced every level of the judicial process in Iran with my flesh and blood. I have seen many women with colorful stories. Some are here due to their misfortune and some are here because of malice within them. I have seen a lot of innocent girls who have been imprisoned for a short time due to a small wrongful act, but the reality of the events they go through, leaves them with no option but to return to prison after they are released. I want judges to read my writings, so that they know how their judgments influence the fate of a girl. A task which I started in the second year of my imprisonment. I wrote articles for many young trainee students at Evan and Shahreh prisons to submit to their lecturers as their own piece of research project. They were glad about obtaining grades without any effort, and I was happy that I had passed on my experiences to a lecturer. And I hoped that my articles would reach a judge someday, unaware that my writings, just like thousands of other student dissertations which were plagiarized and copied from research materials in a library, are collecting dust. Although, how was the lecturer supposed to know that the contents of these articles did not come from library materials, but instead were collected through field experience? So I became hopeless after a while and secretly sent everything out of prison. A task that is now also pending the conclusion of writing these events. Soon this burden will be lifted off my chest and there will be nothing left unsaid to take to my grave with me. The grave which has opened its mouth, but I do not know when it will swallow me. It is now the beginning of the 7th winter that I am spending in prison. The 5th year that I have been facing the death penalty without due process. I believe the reason for the delay in execution is that the head of the judiciary is examining my case. 2 previous heads of the judiciary, Ayatollah Sharaudi and Ayatollah Larijani, had already looked into my case. I wish I could send them these letters. I wish. I wrote to Ayatollah Sharaudi on many occasions, but out of 10 letters only a few of them were successfully sent out of prison and my father handed them to him. The efforts which were unfruitful. It is now Saturday morning and I have visitors today. I must get ready to see my family who come to visit me every week. 4 dearest people who never abandoned me. 4 dearest people who are the pillars of my life. At the end of my time in solitary confinement and after I was transferred to the general ward, I was questioned hundreds of times by my mother and father, especially by my mother. Hard questions and answers, with a lot of diligence. Sometimes, I cried a lot after being questioned by these 2. They appeared to be simply probing me, but to me it felt like a kick in the teeth and it was too painful to bear. But they never abandoned me and I am alive today for the sake of their love. The thought of not having them in my life had utterly destroyed me when I was in solitary confinement, and those days were even more bitter than the taste of venom. The venom which can be traced through its emission at every stage of my life. Today I have a meeting, with those who I love and they love me. I take my energy for the week from my meetings on Saturdays. Today is a good day. The day of living. I am 26-year-old Reyhaneh Jabbari. My home is a bed in prison where I share the bathroom, shower, the sky and even the air with others. There are 2,000 women housed here who are convicted of all sorts of crimes, both large and small. This year was a very cold winter which coincided with our heating system being broken. All that could be heard was chattering of teeth, coughing, sneezing and moaning. This year we had a lot of snow to the point that all those who had lived here before could not ever remember so much snow. But the snow brought with it some joy here. Some were throwing snowballs in the yard and laughing. I did not go. I was freezing. I sat around with hot water bottle I prepared for myself. The chattering of teeth takes me back to the year 2007 when I was kept in solitary confinement with wounds all over my body. I would be shaking from anxiety and fear. Sometimes I was interrogated at Evan and other times at the Criminal Justice Building across the street from Tehran University. Officer Shamlur rarely interrogated me. I was questioned mostly by 2 men whose names I have never found out. They would dictate and I would write. Once they took me somewhere for interrogation where I saw a 14 or 15-year-old girl hanging from the ceiling from her wrists. The girl was very pale and her lips were cracked from her tears. She was moaning. The interrogator sat across from me and said, "Today or tomorrow we will go get your little sister." He referred to her by name, Bayduk. "It is her turn," he said. "She is very thin, How long do you think she will last hanging like that? He asked. I was going crazy inside. He was telling me in detail what he was going to do to my little sister, a sister whose birth I remember clear as day, a sister who is so cute and sweet but always complained about homework. My last image of her is during my arrest. She was so scared that she threw a sheet over her head and I could see her shaking under the sheet. That is my very last image of her. I started crying and begged him not to do such a thing. He said that he had no other choice. As he was speaking, I remembered that a few days after my arrest I had seen the president of my company with handcuffs in the corridor. He looked in rough shape. He showed me the palm of his hands. They were grotesquely swollen. He asked me, "Girl, what did you do?" I turned my face away from him, both from shame and not having enough energy to explain. I thought if they had done such a thing to him, for sure they will hang my little sister from ceiling. I was desperate. I asked him what I could do to stop him from hurting my sister. He said it was very simple. Just confess that you had bought the knife before the murder. What difference does it make, whether you bought the knife or you found it there at the apartment? I asked him why would I have needed to buy a knife at all. He said, "Just say that the victim told you to buy it for your own safety. If I wrote that, then my sister would be safe with the family." Much later I found out that Officer Shamlu, Officer Kamali, my two interrogators and two other men had cruelly taken my sister from our home as accessory to murder. They were going to question her. My father begged them to let him drive her in his car, but they refused and took her in a police car with Kamali driving and Shamlu and the others following in another car, and father following them to the police headquarters. My sister, who is only 14, was shaking from fear. As the car passed a mosque, Kamali said, "God, please help this little girl and her sister." His prayer was somewhat comforting for my sister. At the headquarters, Officer Shamlu asked my sister if she had any prior knowledge of the murder. She answered no. Shamlu said, "Fine, you are free to go," but ordered my father to bring her back the next day for questioning. He never did. Weeks later, due to the shock of the incident, my sister's hair and eyebrow hairs all fell out. Doctors diagnosed her with lupus. To this day she has a nervous condition even with therapy. I wrote that I had bought the knife beforehand, signed it and breathed a sigh of relief. My sister was now safe. I asked him if they had released my mother, which surprised him and told me that my mother had never been arrested. I told him what about the fact that I had her voice. Shamlu came in and asked me if I had broken the light bulb in my cell, and whether I knew my mother had complained about him. I looked at him with bewilderment. The experienced interrogators break the light bulb so no one can see the things they do in the cell. I said that he had told me that my mother had been arrested. He said, "So what? We said it. That is police procedure all over the world, to say whatever you need in order to get to the truth." I shook my head. Everything became clear to me at that moment what they were doing to me. I was returned to solitary, where I would have the occasional conversation with women in adjacent cells. A few days later I was taken for interrogation again. Shamlu was there with two thin men with very long beards. The two men never said one word. Shamlu left and returned with my mother. My heart was beating very fast. My hands were handcuffed. My mother hugged me and kissed me over and over again. Shamlu ordered her to sit next to me. Shamlu said that he had arranged this meeting so that my mother could see I was fine. My mother complained that she had told him over and over again that she could not live without seeing me, and when she had asked to see me they had said that Reyhaneh would get more resolve from seeing me, which would hinder the investigation. She said, "So I had to put in a complaint about you. What other choice did I have?" She said that she had not complained to organizations outside Iran but those inside Iran, and nothing had been done. I listened. How much I loved my mother, who even under such circumstances was logical and in control. Shamlu said, "Reyhaneh, you love your mother a lot. Did you tell her I tortured you?" I put my head down and chose to say nothing as to not make the situation worse. My mother got angry and asked me why I put my head down. "Why don't you say about all the wounds on my body?" I realized that another prisoner named Parvena had told my mother after she was released. My mother said, "Go ahead and show your scars." I started crying and said, "Whatever happened, it is over now." She said, "Not for me." She started questioning Shamlu. She asked, "Who is Colonel Karimi and is he involved in this case?" Shamlu said, "No, the colonel is not involved." My mother asked then why he interrogated us. I started to feel faint. I wish I had my mother's resolve and would say how Colonel Karimi had sucked the life out of me. I wish I could say the various ailments I had from those interrogators. But I said nothing. Shamlu got angry, said he would look into it and asked my mother to leave. My mother got up and hugged me so tight I could not breathe. She said, "No matter what happens, bad or good, I love you, I adore you, God gave you to me." To which Shamlu said, "Well, she is no good." My mother looked into his face and said, "Well, even if she is bad, she is mine, let me take her." Shamlu put his head down and said our meeting was over. They took me downstairs in car. I could see my parents running after the car telling me how they adored me and loved me. I was on the moon knowing that my family was investigating my case. A few days later, my name was called. I took all the little papers I had written on to give to my family. Shamlu's assistant interrogated me. He said that I had complained that their section, the judiciary, had beaten me, and hurt me, and he said that he will send me to be interrogated by the Department of Intelligence so I would really see how easy I have had it here. He told me to write down that I had had relations with my classmates and co-workers. I did not want to implicate these people who were innocent, but I also could not tolerate being tortured by the intelligence services. The interrogator went to get some water as we were both thirsty. I saw my father at the door. He was outside arguing with the interrogator. He was insisting that my interrogator take the money for the bottle of water they had bought me. The interrogator laughed and said, "Why, we are family." I felt sick. He finished questioning me and I was allowed to go and see my parents. The guard that day was Ms. Shekari. She found my papers of writing, confiscated them and gave them to Shamlu, who said he will read them and return them. He never did. So I realized I had no rights to anything. I am in a situation that I never ever thought I would be in. Sometimes I wonder why they see me as such a threat, such a big deal. If they had paid attention, they would notice that I reacted wrongly and gave in to them and accepted the fate they chose for me. I was hopeful at the beginning that the judge would realize the problems of this case. Like when the officers planted the cardboard cover of the knife under my mattress, which they found seconds into their search. Surely the judge would realize that no one would leave the cover of the knife when they planned to commit a murder. After years I lost all hope. I also want to say that in 2007, when I was returned to Evan, I was not sent back to my solitary cell. I and a few other women were kept in the corridors for a while. After they allowed us to return to our cells that night, I noticed the cells were cleaned and all our personal items like plates, utensils, soap, and shampoos were missing. A kind lady, a guard, whose name I will not mention as it may cause her harm, told me that they cleared out all solitary cells because a human rights organization had been visiting conducting an investigation. As a result, they emptied the cells to make it appear that no one is kept in solitary. She also told me that Mr. Sharudi had built these cells. The old cells were not like these one. She said the one I was in was like a hotel compared to the old cells. I began to see how lucky I was to be in these new cells which had a toilet. Many had endured in much worse. Soon after, I was transferred to the public section of prison with other prisoners. I chose section 3 where prisoners get to work a bit. It was 2 floors. The upstairs housed girls 18 to 21 years old. Everything was made of tiles. I was to share a room with 14 women. This room was 6 meters x 4 meters with bunk beds lining the walls. The prisoner, who was showing me around, Taiba, said everyone is in the yard and she took me there. The yard was surrounded with extremely tall walls with barbed wire on top. There I saw some signs of life at least. Everyone was doing something. One person was washing some clothes, Some were playing with a ball and one person was drinking her tea. Taiba said that she has been in prison for the last 4 years. I remember thinking to myself, 4 years here, I would just die if I were her. I had no idea that days, weeks and months would go by for me there. I am 26-year-old Reyhaneh Jabbari. I am doing my time in sub-zero temperatures of Shahreh prison in Iran. It is below zero inside the corridors here. I have not been able to get the face of one woman out of my mind. I was awakened by the screams of a woman one night. They were taking her to the gallows, but because she had an infant that she was still breastfeeding, they postponed her execution for a couple of weeks until her milk dried up. They could not find anyone to take care of her infant after her execution, so the child was going to be given to the state. All the papers were signed. We could hear her blood-curdling cries. She refused to give up her baby. When we saw her, she was sitting in the middle of the yard with all the other women consoling her. But she could not hear or see anything. Do all mothers not act like this when their children are being ripped away from them? Do they not all scream like that? What about my mother, Sholi? I took the girl a glass of water because her lips were dry and cracked. I said nothing. I was at a loss for words. I had seen other children being taken away from their mothers in prison when the child was 2 to 3 years old to be given either to relatives or the state. But she was different. The child was an infant still breastfeeding and the mother was to be hanged. Her screams and moans could be heard up until her breasts had no more milk. It was not long ago when Taiba took me around and introduced me to the other prisoners when I had just arrived. I had no idea that 6 years would pass, 6 cold winters that I would be away from my family. When I was 19 years old I came here. Pretty quickly other prisoners told me that we had 3 minutes a day to call our families. It was Sunday and I was so nervous about calling. I was afraid they would not recognize my voice. My mother answered and all I could get out was a simple hello before my face was wet with tears. I was crying silently. She was crying loudly and telling me how much she loved me and would die for me. I felt so safe for those few minutes with my mother's voice. Then someone tapped me on the shoulder. My time was up. I told my mother I would call again and asked her to come visit me. I was returned to my cell. I sat on my bed. Taiba, God bless her, no matter what her crime was, she was so very kind to me. She was like an angel to me during my first days. That night she talked and talked to me to help me get used to my new surroundings. I knew she must have been very tired from doing all her inspections and the paperwork that had been given to her. The next day I was taken to a section called Cultural Activities. This is where there are classes for prisoners, but of course it is free labor. I signed up for doll making and mosaic work. I would have never in a million years agreed to make dolls by cutting out a pattern and sewing them had I not been in prison. But it made me pass the time and made me tired. I hoped that sleep would come and make me forget. Many times on those first nights, I would wake up in a sweat just to find sweet Taiba caressing my head, giving me a glass of water. She would ask if I was having a nightmare, but I could never remember what I dreamt about. She would tell me to go back to sleep. I was usually drenched in sweat and shaking. A few days after I arrived, it was a Tuesday when my family was coming to visit me. I was so happy I was actually smiling. The other prisoners made a joke that finally they had seen me smile. They called out my name and a few others. We were driven in a car to the place for visitation. There were glass cabins with earphones and green curtains. I was cabin 36. When they lifted the curtain I saw my family. My sisters' faces were red from crying. My parents looked worried but managed an anxious smile. They picked up the phone. My father asked questions about who the man was that I had stabbed, why I had stabbed him, what he did for a living. I got dizzy, realizing the interrogation was not over. My sisters sensed this and said they just wanted to talk like we always did about nonsense sisters talk about. The curtain started lowering, we kept on lowering our heads so that we could see each other for as long as possible. I could not wait until next week. In the next few weeks I decided to get some sort of work inside prison. Working brought with it in-person visitation, meaning no glass partition and longer phone calls, so I jumped at the chance. I also found some books that I would read all through the night. Next visit we were taken through corridor after corridor. Evan was unlike any other building I had ever seen in that it was a maze of corridors and stairs. We got into a room with cheap chairs and tables. The palms of our hands were marked with a red stamp. I saw their 4 faces again. We could hug each other this time. They all looked very sad but managed a smile. I asked my father for pen and paper. He asked for paper from the guard. I wrote how I had acquired the knife. Signed my name in Farsi and put my fingerprint on it after covering my finger with ink from the pen. I gave it to him and told him to read it after our visit. They slipped into my hand a pretty hairpin. We talked and kissed each other. Those visits gave me much happiness. So much so that I would do hard labor in prison because the reward was in-person visits. It was worth it for me. I was becoming more familiar with prison life. One bitter day, they brought in Facte and told us we could say our goodbyes. She was the one I had been with in solitary cells. She is the one that ignited hope inside me with one sentence, told me of the lies of my interrogators Shamlu. She was very pretty. But she was now looking very sickly in the yard leaning against the wall. I went up to her and hugged tightly. She moaned. I was surprised. She said she had been flogged. Flogged now? Before her execution? Why not a year ago? I imagined her family getting her body and seeing the scars. Why was the flogging necessary right before her execution? I learned not to ever hug anyone in prison ever again since their bodies could be ripped from flogging they had received from a brutal angry man. She was taken to solitary as it is often done the night before the hanging. Everyone said goodbye with tears. They do not want the prisoner to hurt themselves in any way to hinder the hanging, thus they are taken to solitary where there is no chance of hurting oneself. On some occasions, with the permission of the warden, with previous arrangements, some chose to spend their last night with a friend. The next morning there was no need to wake up Facte. All her belongings were gathered up and given to her family. Usually, after an execution there is prayer that night and after that all is forgotten. Like nothing ever happened and that person never existed. Everything goes back to normal. When I was 19 I became familiar with the dark and hidden world of our society. I got to know women from different classes and walks of life. I learned that all that one leaves behind is the impression we leave with others. That every minute is different than the next, always changing. Slowly, the bitter experience of solitary was fading away in the quiet of my room. I learned how to get used to my surroundings in prison. I would go around and meet new prisoners and even use some exercise stuff we had available. There was a girl named Heartfelt who came into our room and changed the atmosphere. She was my age, had been sent to Karun prison at 14 due to some relations she had with men. Her parents were separated. Sadly, she could not get used to her new surroundings and thought by complaining, screaming she could solve it all and get what she wanted. But that was not the case. She was exceptionally beautiful. They sent her or rather exiled her to Evan where she was surrounded by people who abused her. It could be foreseen that due to her beauty and youth she was enticing to many, to which she reacted badly. She was then sent to the dreaded Rajeshwar prison where after much conflict she was sent back to Evan. When I first met her she was 19 like me. When she came back to Evan she was in very bad shape mentally. Taiba accepted to take care of her, help her find her way. But sadly, Heartfelt was sent back to Rajeshwar in 2009 where she killed herself. I have many stories to tell of pain and suffering. In order to unburden myself, I shall write these and give them to a friend who shall be responsible in spreading these tales, much like a dandelion spreads its seeds after it changes from a yellow flower into a bulb. Before I leave this world and step into the next I would like to say these things, perhaps without literacy excellence as I am in a hurry. Evans Women's Prison is made of many sections, each of which has 2 floors upstairs and downstairs. Section 1 is for drug offenses/addicts, Section 2 is financial crimes, and downstairs is for those convicted of murder, armed robbery, and assault. Section 3 is for those under 21 regardless of their crime. 2 months after I was sent to the public section of Evan, the warden decided that the woman in charge of the prison store was to be replaced. So I applied for the job. Fruits and vegetables were brought in every 2 weeks, and the most common barter was the telephone card among prisoners. I was very scared to work there, as I would stand out from other prisoners, along with the fact many who had been there very long were like family and defended each other to the death. I was accepted to work there after all. Prisoners feared the store running out of things and they would fight and revolt. So I came up with some rules that everyone really respected. They liked to shop like civilized people, without swearing, yelling and being disrespected by me or others. There were women who would come to the shop who were so rough, they were frightening, but after I spoke to them for a while and listened to their life stories, I realized that they had created the tough facade just to survive in prison. At the end, we all got along. Many of these women did not choose their fates, it was chosen for them. Fate can be changed by just a few factors. The deeper and deeper I got to know the women, the more I realized that they were forced to go in the direction they did instead of choosing it. I realized that even in these harsh conditions, something small can bring some happiness and create some positivity. For example, I decided to celebrate one inmate's birthday. I told everyone, and as a result inmates started making little presents, making cards, and managed to get some sweets in prison. Everyone became closer after that, but it was short-lived as Zeera was executed during all this. She had 3 teenage daughters. She had killed her husband. The judge had tried to convince her daughters to agree to their mother's execution as per Islamic law, but they refused. Zeera was taken to be hanged as she was knitting a shawl for one of her daughters. The shawl was half finished. I am spending the most nostalgic days of my life here, thinking of old bittersweet memories. I find myself in roaring waves that are out of my control. From what I hear from other prisoners who have been here for a while, the state in prison is the same as previous years with only minor changes. The only daily changes involve the prison authorities. They come and go quickly and then all is back to normal again. When I was 19 years old, I met a woman in prison who had a history. She was the oldest prisoner among us. She was wise and kind like all grandmothers. She had somehow managed to escape while she was being transferred to court from prison. The prison used to issue black garbs to female prisoners before her escape, but afterwards they changed it to black with small flowers. She said she had to turn herself in later because she felt guilty, as the authorities had taken her family members hostage and were torturing them. Her case was very similar to mine, like numerous other women like Shala, Cobra, Leda, Marzia. The list is rather long. I came to prison at the start of my youth and I have seen many helpless women here, women without any protection. I live with the nightmares of their lives. Sometimes they just pop into my mind. I go over their lives, lest I forget. I can see Sohila Gatari standing in front me in mind's eye right now. She was thin and was intensely obsessed with cleanliness. She was homeless and had literally grown up on the streets. She had had to fight for each and every meal or a place to stay during the rain. She got pregnant. Somehow she managed to survive and give birth on the street. She thought maybe the child will make her life better and help her escape the darkness. But when she gave birth, Sohila felt worse. In a moment of madness mixed with love, she killed her 5-day-old infant, not because she did not love the child but because she could not see a future for that child. She did not want to see all the things that had happened to her to happen to her baby. After that she saw hands with blood on them and washed them 10 times a day. After she was arrested, she was happy to have a roof over her head in prison. She did not have anyone. The father of the baby was even unknown, and although the authorities tried hard to find out the identity of the father, Sohila refused to reveal his name. She used to say with her distinct accent that man was kind to me, he fed me and gave me a place to stay for a few days, why would I bring harm on him? All the women thought that Sohila would ultimately be pardoned as she was such a classic victim. No one thought anyone would have the heart to hang someone whose life had been so full of misery. But, on a cloudy day, Sohila was hanged, ending her suffering on the streets. I am 26 years old now. I had no idea when I started to listen to the women's stories that one day it would become so painful for me. Who knew that these beautiful cities are so full of suffering? I wish to unburden myself of their stories. They all had something in common, in that few moments of their lives were filled with hatred, blood, or contempt. It was the end of autumn. We had only 2 trees in the prison yard which had lost all their leaves. Their bareness only made it gloomier here in the evenings. I tried to imagine beyond these very tall walls, past the barbed wire. At the beginning, life outside prison with its entire normalcy was still fresh in my mind. I did not believe I would be in prison too long and would soon return to my studies. I thought everything would be sorted out shortly, so I did not see myself as a prisoner like the others. I did not take part in a lot of activities or gossip. I was more the listener than the talker. I did not want my classmates to know that I was in prison. I was very uncomfortable about being in prison. Even when my mother would pass the phone to my aunt during one of our calls, I did not want to speak, I had nothing to say. Slowly, I started thinking that even if I did return home, everyone knew that I had been in prison. It would be marked on my forehead, even my soul, heart, and dreams would be marked. Daily nightmares and my shaky hands were constant reminders of my days under interrogation and torture. Even though I was working in the prison shop, trying to tire myself, I could not shake the events of July 7, 2007. As soon as my mind was still, that day would replay in mind, dancing around in my head. My torturers were the constant companions of my thoughts. Although the interrogations were over, the pain those few men caused me, their absolute hatred towards me and the things they said to me, still haunted me. Everyday life could not erase those men from my mind. Those days I saw my prison life as very temporary and focused on my life afterwards. Evan had new bosses who brought with them new rules. A gang of drug dealers inside prison were identified and sent for questioning and were interrogated for days. I remember they started to return to our ward, one by winter's first snowfall. They were exhausted from their interrogations and spending the nights in the freezing headquarters. Every one of them, without exception, told me that Shamlo had questioned them about me. Whether I had said anything to them about the murder. What I was doing. What I was saying. He also insinuated that now that I was working in the shop, some money may be missing. The fact that there was no exchange of physical money in the store and that all transactions were performed using prison cards which had virtual money on them that the family of the prisoner had paid for, did not stop the accusation. My God! Had I become Shamlo's obsession? Was he sharpening his crocodile teeth for me? The new bosses decided that no prisoner should be working in any section involving money. So I was no longer allowed to work in the store. My parents had paid a deposit in order for me to work there. It took months for the authorities to return the money to my parents. They put one of the prison personnel in charge of the store. Of course, inside prison there was a lot of exchange of items going on among prisoners. For example, the women who were arrested at parties for their improper Islamic attire did not stay long. So they needed essentials very quickly. They would often exchange their very expensive scarf with a can of tuna or sheets, clothes, or the like. If they smoked, it was a disaster. This was the unofficial sale of goods in Evan. Inside Shar prison the currency is phone cards. For example, 2 boxes of Kleenex are worth 1 phone card. Those women who were living on the streets before prison, those who had no family to buy them prison cards, had to work in prison. They cleaned, washed clothes and swept. They would get paid with phone cards. Eventually, they would have a lot of phone cards which they would sell for money. Many women, who had children on the outside, would earn money this way and send it to their children even though the amount was very small. Some earned money with knitting scarves. The system was bartering. Of course, there were those who had been in prison before the card system was enforced who had cash on hand. They would sell their money at high prices for those who were leaving prison and needed money for their families. One could also ask prison personnel to buy some items for them from the outside. For example, due to lack of vitamins and poor nutrition, most prisoners' hair started falling out. They would ask staff to buy them certain shampoos. After I was not allowed to work in the shop anymore, I had no idea how to pass the time. I started to read books. I did not care which book. In the winter they called me for court. A staff member secretly told me that they were taking me for interrogation. So I packed myself a few items, some thick socks and sweaters since I knew how cold that detention center was from experience. It was always freezing. I took a few cookies/crackers with me too. The streets were very busy and just like a person riding in a car for the first time, I had motion sickness. All traffic noises, the fast speed of the cars, new fashions, mothers holding their children's hands, I could hear the sounds of freedom and life. We arrived at the shop or headquarters where I had spent the worst days of my life. We went up the stairs. I had to sit in that cold and frightening corridor facing the wall awaiting those men, my interrogators. I tightened all my muscles in case they come and hit me from behind really hard, so I would be prepared so my teeth would not break. Nothing happened. I waited for hours without food, water, or being allowed to go to the bathroom. It was now in the afternoon when I saw a young, thin man enter with my father. They took away my watch as well as my food and gave it to my father who was sitting and speaking to the young man, but my father's gaze was frozen on me. We were startled by a man's screams that was running as he was being chased and beaten on his back by an interrogator's belt. "Run, faster, faster, do not stop," the interrogator kept on screaming. My father turned pale. This scene was not strange to me, but he had not seen such a thing ever before. They told my father to leave. I looked at him with fear in my eyes, asking him silently not to leave me there with those people, that I was horrified, that they were all dragons and monsters who spewed out fire. I began to cry. I always hated to cry but I could not stop my tears. He started walking away from me when suddenly he turned around, walked towards me and hugged me. My hands were handcuffed so I could not hug him back. He whispered in my ears, "May God protect you, my dear. I wish I could be here instead of you." My throat was so dry that I could not get out any words. The young man ordered my father to leave. My father's tears dripped onto my cheek. As he was leaving, my father, while crying, told the young man, "I leave my child in your care, do not beat her." The young man said, "Beat her? Why would we beat her? Who told you we were going to beat her?" I was horrified. "Daddy, they brought me here to see that scene," I said. "Reyhaneh, my dear, from now until they let you go, your mother and I are with you. These people want to tear you apart, into pieces. But we will continue to follow up on your case. My dear, try and endure for now. You are a Kurdish girl, Kurds are strong and fear nothing. Like a lion, stay brave," my father was saying loudly as they were pushing him out the door. The young man, without a trace of emotion in his face, started to question me about where I had bought the knife. It seems that my old tormentors were no longer in charge, but their presence still lingered in those halls. He kept asking which store I had bought the knife, on what street. Note: Reyhaneh had never purchased a knife and did not have it on her person at the time of the incident. She found it at the scene. His only interest was that knife. I spent a few nights at that freezing, cold headquarters. It was very cold there, but the extra clothes I had packed for myself helped keep me warm. Every day, I was forced to sit facing the wall in that corridor. I wore many layers of clothes in case they decided to burn me on my back again. I would have a bit of protection and it would hurt a bit less. But there was no sign of beatings or torture. Every day I was returned to sit in that corridor. Everyone that would pass me would threaten me. There was a very thin officer that swore and threatened to hurt me all the time. One day he was extremely angry. He held a hot flask of tea over my head and told me he was going to pour it over my head if I did not say things properly. I moved my head back, he moved his flask back to my head again and threatened to burn me. The week I was there I was threatened over and over again. But each time they actually wanted to go through with it, something would happen to distract them and the deed was not done. Every day from 8 o'clock a.m. to 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock p.m. I was waiting to be tortured. The true torture was the waiting. Then one day they took me in the car. I could see life again, stores, people walking, buildings, houses, all the things I missed terribly. The smell of baked bread and sweets wafted through the air. They took me into a store that sold kitchen stuff. They asked the staff if they sold the type of knife I had used. Then they asked the manager if he recognized me. He said he did not and that they did not sell that type of Swiss knife in his store. The officer gave the store manager his card and told him to call if he remembered anything. The manager said he doubts he would remember anything else. I realized that the authorities did not know what to say about the knife. We left in the car again where I could see life continuing to exist on the streets. It was a Tuesday when I returned to Evan. Everyone was waiting for me. Many greeted me in tears because the rumor was that I had been transferred or exiled to another prison. One prisoner immediately gave me her phone card so I could call my family to let them know I am fine. They told me that my family had come to visit me and were very upset that I was not there. They had seen my mother crying. Everyone knew my mother by now. Sholi, my mother, was well known for bringing items for the prisoners, clothes for those who had children in prison with them, their favorite foods and things like that. She would bring foods for them that they had not tasted for years. I called my mother who started crying. She was so worried they had tortured me. She could not believe that I had not even been slapped. I realized that she had come to the headquarters every day from the afternoon until evening, praying and meditating. She said she would imagine protection all around me and would concentrate on it. She also said she had turned off the heat in the house so she would be as cold as I was in the headquarters. In support with me she had refused to heat the house. Ever since she had found out in 2007 that prison food had no meat, she had stopped eating meat altogether. Our loving conversation lasted only 5 minutes but it gave me warmth. Time was passing by very fast. It could be seen on the 2 trees in the yard. A new year was arriving and with some money I had managed to buy from an Arab prisoner I managed to get some sweets. Life went on even behind bars. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and have been away from my home for almost 7 years. The prison hall is cold as usual and the heaters are all broken. Last night, I covered my socks with plastic bags and wore another pair of socks on them. The plastic bags kept the heat in and helped me to get warmer to get some sleep. The air I was breathing was freezing cold. I covered my head with the blanket and, in the darkness of the night, thought of cold winter days. Winter, the season that has witnessed the execution of many well-known women, such as Taiba, Shala, and many more. Even though I wanted to tell the events of my life in order, the cold weather caused me to remember all my court sessions. A few months before the trial I finally managed to have an attorney. He was a rather young man, named Mohammed Mustafa. I vividly remember the first day I was called to meet with him. Mom had told me a lot about him and how he had other murder cases, defending teenagers under 8 years of age. At the time of the incident I was only 1 year older than 18. Since the meeting was in person, I thought of taking some food for him. I found a peach cookie with much difficulty which would have been enough to thank him for defending me. Mustafa had come with a tall, slender woman who was wearing a grey, striped sweat. She was apparently his assistant. I put the cookie on the table. The assistant didn't want any and he asked me to eat it myself. We talked for about half-hour and I signed and fingerprinted 3 sheets of paper. He asked me about prison conditions and said I should stay emotionally strong. I laughed silently. I had been in prison for close to a year but had been through several years of hardship. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. At this time, I am not afraid of anything in the world and don't get surprised by anything. The prospect of death doesn't scare me anymore, just as the prospect of a dreamlike life doesn't deceive me. I don't judge anything based on its appearance, as in the past few years I have seen so many things that appeared to be good on the surface but there was evil in their depths. I met many people who had beautiful faces but were ugly monsters inside. However, when I had just turned 20 I feared death, loved life and romanticized it. I wanted my trial to start immediately as I was confident my freedom would come soon. I hated Sarbandai. He wasted 1 year of my life. I had reviewed the incident in my mind hundreds of times and later described how I had been deceived by his pious appearance. I had a dream about him before my trial started. I was in an old, multi-story building. It looked like the office of a newspaper. I was walking in high heels, carrying a glass of sugared water in my hands and no guards were with me. While going up the stairs, I decided to throw away the glass as I had no use for it. I bent and let go of the glass, but changed my mind and caught it before it touched the floor. I could hear the echo of my heels on the old stones. I entered a room and saw my father and Sarbandai standing there. They both passed out while still standing. I didn't know what to do with the sugared water. I told my father, Sarbandai would bite me if I ignored him. I gave Sarbandai only a sip of the water and saved my father by giving the rest to him. When I woke up, I didn't understand what the dream meant. Later, I got to know Cobra Ramanipour, who was an expert in interpreting dreams. At age 20, she had murdered her old mother-in-law and was dubbed the Black Bride. She was a very nervous woman but was in charge of interpreting the dreams of the inmates. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and I confess that I miss Cobra. She was freed a while ago while she was extremely scared of the streets and the people outside. A few years ago, I told her, Cobra, you have become very well known. They have named a street after you, in Italy. She didn't believe me and with her high-pitched voice said, get lost. What does Italy have to do with me? I told her, I swear to God, my mom heard your name on TV. But she did not believe me until others started saying the same thing and she got happy and twirled her hands in the air. And a minute later she went about her business as if nothing had happened. Cobra was a beautiful 20-year-old who had married a 50-year-old man with a 20,000 Tuman dowry. Her mother-in-law, Farrak, never acknowledged her as her daughter-in-law. She openly disrespected her and called her ugly and an illiterate pauper with no family. These were only a small part of what Farrak did to her until she finally kicked her out of the house after giving her the 20,000 Tuman dowry, very low, equivalent to $30. Cobra thought of revenge. She may have thought justice and law prevailed in this country, but she was wrong. She confronted Farrak, and Farrak attacked her with a knife. She took the knife out of her hand and took vengeance for the humiliation of the 20,000 Tuman, the money Farrak had paid to buy Cobra. Poor Cobra was taken to the gallows 3 times before the execution was cancelled. She was finally freed after 13 years. After the second time at the gallows, she looked like the walking dead. She walked, talked, ate, and even laughed, but it was all fake and devoid of spirit, like a robot. Several times, I heard her saying she preferred death to this life. She preferred dying once to dying every day. She used to say, her crime was not murder but poverty and illiteracy. When I said goodbye to her, she was confused, and scared of everyone, even her parents whom she loved. She, like me, got to know the world in prison. My friend, Cobra, I miss you and your dream interpretations. I wish you could tell me if one can live free after being in prison for a long time. Can one have a normal life? When I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, was 20 years old, I was gradually learning trial techniques. I was learning that a defendant is guilty even before trial and sentencing. I was learning that anyone who comes into contact with the legal system is guilty unless the opposite is proven. In the harsh winter days of 2008, after the second inspection, I realized that Inspector Shamlo had developed an indictment that his boss, so far Kaki considered incomplete. Therefore, the new inspection started with going to the home goods store. A few days later, I found out that they had summoned Hastam-I. He was the person with whom I wanted to marry and share my life and build a future. Confused and scared, he had gone to the court with my mother. Shamlo had interrogated him. When Shamlo had noticed he had not gone there alone, he had threatened to arrest him. I thought that was so funny. I imagined Hastam being incarcerated, and upon his entrance to the prison he had to fill out a form, and the reason for sentencing would be, my future mother-in-law accompanying me to the criminal court. Shamlo had tried his best to scare Hastam and accuse him of being an accessory to murder. Hastam had denied everything. As a result, the event had been recorded as a simple interrogation. 1 year later, I asked Mustafa Reyhane's original lawyer to bring me the report. He did, and I read it. Hastam, who had been his family's beloved and only son, had become depressed by the time our relationship had been severed. All the insecurities and fears had taken their toll in the long-distance love. Occasionally, we talked about past memories on the phone and would end the call while we were both crying. His handwriting on the interrogation report showed he had been scared. Many years have passed since I had his love in my heart, and now, I have nothing but a memory. I remember the day I put an end to that love. I wrote on a piece of paper, "This was the best thing that happened to me because I am not attached to anyone anymore and therefore, am able to fight for myself." Shamlo was gradually losing his mind. Some newspapers published interviews they had with him. He always talked about my arrest as a big victory, as if a hero had captured a powerful enemy in a fierce war. These interviews continued for a few years, and each time a new detail was added. The miserable Shamlo even hated the boy I loved and wanted to treat him the worst possible way. He had reported that in his opinion my case was flawless. However, Kaki, the assistant prosecutor, had objected to some minor issues to make a stronger case so that it would not be rejected by the court. The poor man didn't know that Judge Kokomarei would reject the case, asking to make it stronger. Shamlo, who had lost all his authority to 2 interrogators from the Ministry of Information and constantly talked about the opinions of someone named Jabbari, had become delusional. One of his interesting delusions was this: we haven't been able to find Shiki. We found someone named Akhoundi in your phone directory. Is this the same person? Sheik, Akhund? They had summoned and interrogated the poor guy. In several other occasions, I was forced to identify other people with the hope of finding Shiki. Shamlo had found few men with the name Shiki recorded at the registrar's office. One of the last ones was a man from the south of Iran. When I claimed not to know him, man was overjoyed and said he was delighted not to know me but happy to be acquainted with me. He left as fast as he could. In his delusions, the miserable Shamlo developed a new theory. He said, "Reyhaneh, you have a creative mind. Shiki was possibly a creation of your delusions and imagination." He was deceiving himself. By this time, I knew where Sarbandai worked and where their dreadful organization was connected to. Even during my horrific interrogation and when I was writing what was dictated to me, I could tell a strange story was being created. Starting that day, I repeatedly demanded to know how many stab wounds had Sarbandai received. When I didn't get any replies, I insistently said, "I stabbed him once on the right side of his body." By then, I tried to make sure nothing more than what I had really done would be recorded in my file. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and am recording what has happened to me in winter of 2014. I am now distracted by the laughter of a few women who are in the middle of their daily interactions. Nowruz is getting close and everyone is preparing something to the best of her ability. When I was waiting for Nowruz in 2008, I realized the long New Year holidays were a time for group celebrations and that you have to create some means for these celebrations. I learned how to make playing cards. The first few years, I used X-ray film, but later I learned to use old phone cards to make playing cards. These cards all look alike and can be stacked up. The inmates never stay idle and always find a way to party and get together, both for happy and sad occasions. Certain game that we all loved in childhood, were very popular among the inmates. Reyhaneh Jabbari met Shireen Alamholi while playing that particular game. I registered her when she was transferred from Ward 209 to the public ward. I worked in the prison office then, and because Mrs. R was very busy I acted as her assistant. Mrs. R was a middle-aged woman who had worked at the Evan prison since 1980s and had seen and heard many things. I will dedicate a future section to this lady, what I learned from her and the stories she told me about that particular decade. She deserves a section dedicated just to her. Shireen was a young Kurdish girl whose crime was security-related. She took the upper bunk of a bed in Ward number 2. She was very quiet. I don't know whether she was quiet due to her political leanings or because she didn't speak Farsi well. My knowledge of her was limited to observing her when she played this popular game. It was just a few days before her execution that I recognized her amazingly serene spirit. The day after her execution, the prison staff members told me she was executed together with some other people. While the others were arguing with the officers and the supervising judge, Shireen spoke up and said, "Why are you arguing so much? We are going to be executed. So, calm down and don't delay it. Let's get it over with." Apparently, they executed her first, and the 4 other men later. As far as I know, her family still doesn't know where she has been buried. Shireen didn't tell me much about her family. In the women prison, there isn't much interaction between the political and ordinary inmates. I will later explain why there is such a gap between these two groups, if I have a chance. My young uncle passed away in a foreign country close to Nowruz 2009. Even though he was far away, I loved him and his death was a big shock for me. I learned then, that you can plan a memorial service in prison. A staff member brought me candles and black ribbon and we could get dates and halva. Everyone attended my uncle's memorial, dressed in black, but I wore a navy blue outfit. Sholi refused to bring me a black dress no matter how much I insisted. She didn't want me to wear black and her reasoning was I had enough sorrow and danger in my life. Conducting a memorial service in prison has a different set of rituals. As we all know, memorial services last a few hours. In the outside world, friends and particularly neighbors are very considerate of the grieving family and don't have joyous celebrations for a while. However, everyone is your neighbor in prison. So, even though all the inmates visit the grieving person, the next day they are free to celebrate a happy occasion. I attended many memorial services, including one for Shala's father who got sick a short while before Shala's execution, and with much hardship, her family got permission for her to go and visit her dying father. I even attended the memorial service for Sohila P., a 19-year-old woman who committed suicide in prison. She had been married at age 15 and even had a baby. However, this child mother didn't have the capacity for life responsibilities and had killed her baby. She moved to the council ward when it was formed. Life was different in the council ward. Everyone was silent and took heavy doses of medication every night. They all had bad headaches, so always wore scarves on their heads. The only advantage of this new ward was that you could cook your own meals. I moved there for a while just to be able to cook. It may be due to the variety of food I had there, that I don't have any cravings now. I cooked any meals I had seen or eaten at home. I saw Sohila right after she had jumped from the second floor of that ward. The floor was covered with blood and Sohila's head had been cut open. Everyone was restless and screaming. A few staff members were sitting on the stairs and didn't have the strength to stand up. The sound of screams in the confined area alerted the officials. Sohila was still alive. She didn't move but was breathing. A few hours later, there was no sign of the accident. She was announced brain dead and her organs were donated to others, and as told by her mother, her lifeless body was put to rest in the section reserved for the warriors. Her mother sent me a letter through Sholi to find out if someone had pushed Sohila. I asked around and realized that she alone was responsible for her death. She may have gotten weary before her time or may have slipped. However, no one else was responsible for her death. A little after my uncle's passing, Nowruz arrived. Even though I never liked Sholia's spring cleanings, I learnt the value of cleanliness in prison. The outdoors walking area was filled with washed sheets and clothes. It was so busy that we had to sit and wait for our belongings to dry, so that we wouldn't lose them. If we left, you would lose an outfit and would see someone else wearing it a few days later. Everything, including the walls, hallways, staircases, beds, carpets and rugs were washed. The prison store sold sweets and every day, long lines were formed in front of it. The joy and excitement of Nowruz was completed with a half-scene spread that we created, each item of which we had found from a different place. The only missing item was a goldfish, of which we were happy to have a picture. Mrs. R brought me some flower seeds which I planted in a tin can. I bought some decorative items from prisoners who had just entered from the outside world and received the new dresses that Sholi had bought and delivered to prison. Everything was ready. However, when the new year arrived, except for a few, all of us cried and sobbed as if a disaster had happened. When our tears ran out, we gradually became our normal selves. Some started dancing and playing imaginary musical instruments. Their joy and laughter was contagious. An hour later, we were all happy as if we had never cried. That was when I experienced joy and sorrow simultaneously. And that was how I started experiencing depression. My restless soul was happy for a moment and filled with nightmares a minute later. I started showing trivial behavioral changes. I talked loudly, started developing tics, talked aggressively and Sholi noticed these changes during our in-person visits. A little before the anniversary of that ominous incident, with my mom's insistence, every day, I started calling one of her friends who was a psychoanalyst. Our conversations tortured me and drove me crazy. Sholia's persistence for making these calls frustrated me. If I didn't make the call one day, she would use her mother power on me and begged, yelled, or made me promise, "Reyhaneh, swear to my life that you would call." And I would say, "Okay, Mom." And she would repeat, "Don't forget. You swore to my life." All the clothes she sent me in the summer of 2009, were orange or had orange in them. She even sent me a bright orange shawl and asked me to install it on the roof of my bunk bed. The shawl created a beautiful atmosphere around my bed. I didn't understand her persistence in talking to the psychoanalyst and did it only to make her happy. However, I realized the significance of it later. When I was in charge of giving out the prisoners' antidepressant medication, I noticed some who became restless because of small issues and took tons of medication. Some even needed more than they were given and bought them from others. In the fall of 2009 I realized that the same orange color and the seemingly unimportant phone calls saved me from depression. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and have overcome many obstacles and dangers in the past few years. They have ranged from struggling against a man, to struggling against the interrogators, the inspectors, and the environment. However, the toughest struggle was the one I had with myself. After the first anniversary of Sarbandai's death, which had happened with a knife I pushed into his arm, I performed a surgery on my heart and soul using an invisible knife. There was turmoil inside me while I looked silent, and controlled my tears. I was unfolding the hidden corners of my soul. I had a fragmented picture of myself. To retrieve a clear and smooth picture of myself I had to scream in silence, repeatedly. I reduced my work hours for a while. Mrs. R was aware of the commotion within me. She realized that my body could not bear my soul anymore. However, I personally didn't realize that I was going through a transformation, was observing my bare soul and was getting to know myself again. The hardest days of my inner journey started in summer of 2009, right when I went deep into my cocoon and became quieter than before. My family recognized this change and thought I was still depressed. My unfocused mind tortured me and I was exhausted from associating with others. I felt 1,000 years old and my essence was filled with death. I felt my face was wrinkled and my back hunched over, unaware that my aged soul had influenced my entire life. I had deep regrets for the lost life, the happiness that I possessed and abandoned in an instant. I longed for flying in the limitless sky. I surrounded myself with a wall within the prison walls of Evan and practiced dying. In my imaginations, I died over and over again. I cried repeatedly without shedding a teardrop. There were seeds growing within my soul and under my skin. No one but me knew that I was about to be reborn. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old. What I have learned is that prison makes you old and withered when you are in the apex of your youth and efflorescence. The tragedy begins when you try to find the guilty party after the event that has put you in prison. You start reviewing the past and remember the details of your life. Remembering freedom makes you desire it and you lose patience and tolerance. I remember the evenings in spring of 2007 when, Reyhaneh Jabbari returned home from the office or university and sat in front of the computer and searched the World Wide Web. I always loved technology. I enjoyed the fact that the internet had made the world smaller and finding answers to questions easier. I liked to know the world, the people, the nature, the past and the future. There was a site called Degrees where you could find new friends and chat with old classmates who were far away now. You would see the latest jokes, pop music, new songs by foreign artists and chats that were appealing to careless and happy years of youth. I sometimes laughed hard reading the group chats and the messages we left for each other. One depressing afternoon, I called home from prison. My sister said that Miriam had commented on 360 that she missed me and felt my presence every moment. Miriam was my childhood friend who was my mother's favorite before I was born. She was 2 years older than me. We were each other's playmate, companion, and confidant. Miriam, her brother Mohammed whom my mother had nursed and we considered as our brother, my 2 sisters and I had formed a group who all my friends knew of, before my prison term. It was called the 5 Kids. My childhood and early youth memories are filled with the presence of the 5 kids. I remember the long games we had that sometimes messed up the entire house and my mother had to clean up our mess the next day. I was sad and jealous when I heard Mayam had left me a message. I was angry to have been thrown to a prison corner. I wished that everyone would be prevented from doing what they did. I wished the time would stop and start again when I returned home. But my wishes never came true and the world turned as before. Every day, some people were freed and others incarcerated. Routine life continued in prison. I hated myself. A hatred was growing in my heart which I didn't like but felt its presence more every moment. I started recognizing this inner feeling on the day Fariba, an inmate of the Mothers with Children ward, brought me a little spaghetti. I ate it with a strange joy and voracity. I never thought I would crave so much for food, but that damned food made me recognize the new me. I had always been proud and hated gluttony. I had never asked my friends for food. I always received less than I gave to others. I followed rules that had been instilled in me since childhood. But I didn't share any of that damned spaghetti with anyone. I chewed every little bite repeatedly. I didn't want it to be finished. Many hours after eating it, there was still an intense struggle in my mind, a struggle between me and myself. I kept thinking, how was everything ruined? How did I turn my back to everything that was important to me? My internal search made me realize that the cause of all the emptiness and futility was the event that had brought me to prison, and the trust I had bestowed on a pious face. That realization was a sudden and strange jolt, just as if you are sleeping and electricity goes through your body. You wake up but are confused. I was awake and saw myself, but was totally lost and confused. I had been dumbstruck and crushed under the debris of my own image. All the images in my mind had been ruined. I could not observe and believe the destruction of my spirit. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, am 26 years old and cannot continue remembering how I came to know myself. I still feel sad and hurt when I think about the confusion and vagrancy of my mind and spirit in the summer of 2008. I may look back at this old world again if I get a chance and stay alive. With the end of summer and the beginning of autumn, I started thinking about restoration of my messy and confused thoughts. I started making strange plans that seemed impossible at the time, i.e. continuing my education. At the time, I worked at the counseling office. In a way, I was Mrs. R's assistant. Her real name was Mansoret. All the prison staff had pseudonyms, but that was not important. Mrs. R liked me and I liked her. I could clearly see the surprise in her eyes, when I first told her I wanted to continue my education. She opposed the idea immediately. I had just finished the first stage of my own struggle and was therefore more persistent than her. I reiterated my desire every day and she came up with a new excuse to discourage me. She would say, "We can't allow professors in prison," and I would say, "I don't need to have professors here, I would get the study material and study by myself." She would say, "We don't have anyone to administer the exams and take them to your university," and I would say, "My father would carry them to the university." She would say, "It is not possible to have computers in prison," and I would reply, "I will send a request to the General Manager of Prisons Affairs." She would then say, "The Prison Affairs doesn't have a budget for purchasing computers," and I would reply, "I will have my own computer brought from home." She would reply, "That is not possible because the prison officials would not accept any equipment you can hide something in." I would say, "I will pay the prison officials to buy me a computer. He won't hide something inside." Whatever she said, I would come up with a different solution, but I could not find any way to continue my education. I thought to myself, the only way to continue life in face of the idle and routine life in prison was studying. I even thought of repeating high school education if I could not continue my college studies. I said, I would like to earn another high school diploma. She laughed and asked, "What major do you want to study?" I said, "Humanities." There was practically no book in the prison library that I had not read, ranging from cheap popular novels to literary masterpieces, religion and spirituality to history and geography. That same week, sent a request for new books to the director of Evin Prison. Contrary to Shahreh Prison that received only 2 newspapers, Ittalaat and Himayat, there were several different newspapers in Evin, newspapers that would inform the inmates of the latest events. The political prisoners, who associated with one another, sometimes analyzed the contents of the newspapers. Many of their analyses seemed funny to me. It was as if they were drowned in their visions and did not observe the reality, an example of which was the women prisoners, their lives, dreams, and lifestyle. Among all the different newspapers, I read Hamshari, Etamat and Jam more than others and cover to cover. Sometimes, the louder inmates disturbed my solitude. They started fooling around by treating the classified ads as games. They picked ads for sales of homes or cars and pretended they were the buyer or the seller. These were small excuses to remember their freedom and their lives. After all the fooling around, they gradually became quiet and started talking about being homesick and depressed. But I never showed my depression and homesickness. I always listened. To get away from depressing thoughts, I had become more persistent about continuing my education. The more I insisted, the more Mrs. R ignored me. At least she pretended to ignore my request, while without my knowledge she had talked to her managers about them. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, before leaving her office, she called me and said, "You have a chance to continue your education if you change your major and take the university entrance exam again." My heart was filled with excitement. 1 week later, I had the necessary study material that my mom had purchased in my hands. 4 other inmates joined me in this effort. The plan was to register at Pay Amin-Our University. The new goal of continuing education, not being idle and building a bridge to the future, was making me feel closer to the world outside. Even though none of us passed the entrance exam, we spent some time competing in our studies and preparing for the exam. At the height of our struggles in prison, we learned to spend a big part of our energies for higher purposes. Solving problems, asking questions from others, reviewing common lessons and memorizing poetry and historical events taught me that the planning process for achieving a goal is more important than the goal itself. One thing I learned in this period of my life was that, nothing becomes completely and wholly available to you. You have to achieve your goals by taking one step at a time. My mother had told me about a man who had learnt English in prison. He had found a dictionary and learnt a new word every day, and after many years in prison had learnt to talk in that language. The man was Jamaluddin Asad Abadi. I wanted to tell myself after leaving prison, that my life had not passed in idleness and vanity. I wanted to study industrial engineering. What a sweet dream. When I am free, no one will say my life was wasted, no one will pity me, no one will think, poor soul, her youth was lost. What is she going to do now, completely idle? I hated the sympathy and pity of others. But I had to pass through the courts to gain my freedom. I was waiting impatiently. My repeated phone calls to my father and Mustafa resulted in my request for an early court proceeding to be presented and accepted. The date was set for November of 2008. My mother was against that date. She felt a later court date would psychologically prepare me better. She knew better than anyone that my internal struggles had not ended and felt an early court date would cause me more emotional turmoil. I celebrated my birthday to escape from my anxiety. I turned 21 on November 5, 2008. It was the second year that my mom was celebrating my birthday alone, without me. My grandparents and aunt had gotten permission from the Evan court to visit me. The 8 of us had a quiet celebration. I had made a cake and in lieu of gifts they had all deposited money in my prison account. But my dad bought me a pendant with the picture of a scale, which he slipped into my hand. He mentioned the scale was a metaphor for hope for justice. I had it around my neck for a while. A few months later, a prison guard found it and returned it to my mother. She still wears it, hoping for justice. I arranged a big party at my ward. I ordered a cake which I paid too much for, but enjoyed it nevertheless. I, Reyhaneh Jabbari, at age 21 spent one of the best days of my life among the most downtrodden, distressed women, women who had spent all their lives either in prison or in cardboard boxes on the streets. These were women who remembered finding a refrigerator cardboard box as great luck in their lives because it protected their bodies from the rough bridges and railways they slept at. There were people at my birthday who were either executed later, which made me very sad, or felt they were treated like human beings for the first time, people who had been invited to a celebration for the first time. These same people who never had visitors and never had a good meal to eat, brought me gifts, ranging from phone cards to greeting cards to self-made dolls. They gave me scarves, a blouse, pictures, and handmade bags, hair clips, hair bands, stockings, hats and hand-woven sweaters. Mrs. R had allowed us to borrow a tape player from the office to have a fun afternoon and had told the evening guard to let us stay up till midnight. Words cannot describe the happiness in our ward. There were all styles of dancing, fooling around, endless laughter and momentary joy. We used the office tape player till 10 p.m. After that, we used spoons, plates, pots, buckets and anything that could make noise and played them till a little after midnight. Sharing the large cake created a good story of that evening. With that birthday celebration, I repaid what I owed and was freed from the heavy guilt of eating that damned spaghetti that I had not shared with anyone. I was free to focus on my studies and court proceedings. I wanted to be free. I didn't want to owe anything to myself when I was freed from prison and my lungs were filled the air of freedom. And I was counting the days for my court to start. The news of my court date was given on December 12, 2008 in Etamad newspaper. Tomorrow was my assigned court date. But I wasn't feeling good. I was afraid and worried. I was sorry and wished the date had not arrived. I wished I had not requested an early court date. My doubt and hesitation indicated that I didn't have the required mental stability yet and my internal struggle had not ended. That night my father comforted me, "Dearest, go to bed earlier tonight. Don't think about anything. Everything will turn out fine. God is great." My mother was bringing me food that evening. I asked her to bring me my favorite dish from my free days. I had tasted it many times with the 5 kids. I had repeatedly talked to Shala, Taiba, Azam, and many others about my trial. Shiloh had told me that during her court proceedings and interrogation her teeth were broken, but when she reported it to court, the judge had not believed her and she had been forced to repeat what she had said during the interrogation. Another person showed me a part of her head that still had no hair and mentioned that part of her hair was pulled out from the roots and bled when the interrogator was pulling it. But again, when she reported that to the judge, he did not accept it. Taiba mentioned she had been severely beaten, but no one believed her. She was nervous and took antidepressants. She complained of nervous pains and said she would never forgive Judge Hematyar. But Azam mentioned, before you were here, they severely beat up a woman to confess to a murder. All her bones were broken. I don't know how she managed to get the evidence from the forensics office and proved that she was beaten. She wrote to Sharudi and he followed it up. She is free now and is filing a complaint with the officials. Shalat and some others said, there is no use. You have to repeat whatever you have confessed before, otherwise you will put yourself in deeper trouble. They may take you to the police department again. I, however, had decided to expose all the people who had harassed me. As soon as I was in front of the judge, I was going to tell him to accept everything I had said up to the third day. I was going to explain everything completely. I was going to have Kamali summoned so that he could say everything the agents had done. I was going to personally explain the contradictions in my confessions. The judge could not stand up to my logic. Good days were waiting for me.